Hello, here we are. I always forget there's a bit of camera black at the end of that intro. Sorry we're late. Been having a few sound technical issues here. One of us has got a bit of echo going on, so we're gonna have to mute ourselves occasionally when different people talk, which might make for a more entertaining stream than normal. But if it's entertaining for you guys watching, that's all that matters. So I'm sure it'll be interesting at the very least. Now, I have an absolutely fantastic panel lined up tonight. I'm going to bring them in one at a time, but we're going to be talking about our top 5 horror films from 1970 to 1990. So including the years 1970 and 1990, but no further either side of that. Going to be promoting the hell out of this book as well. Welcome to Elm Street, which is now available on Amazon. The link will be below shortly if it's not right now. And I'll be putting it in the chat as well. And we're going to be talking to the author of this, Wayne Byrne. It's Byrne, not Brian. It's Byrne. So he's going to be on talking about this book and also telling us his choices as well. Now, you can take part, those people watching, but we do them one at a time in reverse order. 5th choice first, going down. 5th choice scores 1 point. 4th choice, 2 points. 3rd choice, 3 points. 4th choice, and so on. You get the idea. So, and I'm actually going to keep a record, and then we're going to announce what are the top 5 films overall. It's not a definitive list or anything. It's just fun. Don't get too into it. Okay, but you put your choices in the chat. When we say number 5 chat, put your number 5 choice in the chat. Don't put all of them in one go. Right, first, one of my newer guests on the channel. He popped in the other week. If Halloween isn't in his list, it should be, because he is the king of the pumpkin people. The Gourd King.
Hello, everybody.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing really well. How are you all doing?
Not too bad. It's a bit hot here. And like I showed you earlier, I was setting up a big game in the other room and I lost track of time.
Yeah.
You shouldn't set up big model games at 6 o'clock when you've got to stream at 9. It's very easy to lose track of time. Did take quite a few phone calls in that time as well. So I was a little bit distracted. We also still recovering from our Judge Dredd stream. We still have the Inside Man, Judge Man. Still got Judge Man written on your from last night. How are you, sir?
Hello, mate. How you going?
Yeah, good. So we had some echo audio issues earlier with one of our guests. So we may have to mute ourselves occasionally because when we talk, there is an echo. As you can see, it's not happening right now, but it might happen in a bit. So anyway, have you got your top 5 list, sir?
I certainly have.
And Gourd King, you've got your top 5.
I do indeed.
Fantastic. I had to create a top 10 in order to work out what my top 5 was.
Yeah.
And I had a short list of about 35 films as well. So, or at least 30. Okay.
I think this was probably one of the toughest to do, to be honest.
Very tough. Yeah. Lot tougher than the Burt Reynolds top 5 for me. That was pretty tough. That was, believe it or not, Gourd King, that was pretty tough because you've got to take into account best moustache and, there's all kinds of factors. So anyway, without any further ado, the man in the pink shirt is here. See, there's the echo. I've got to mute myself now. Wayne, introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Wayne Byrne, author of Welcome to Elm Street, and it's great to be here again. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Wayne.
How's it going, guys? How are things?
Hello.
Yeah.
So as you can tell, we're going to have a lot of fun echoing happening on this stream. But Wayne, before we dive in, tell us a bit how the Exorcist book came about. Before you haven't missed it, Siren. We haven't started it yet. We've got a bit of an echo audio issue. We haven't missed it yet. But before we dive in, the order we're going to go in is we're going to talk about Wayne's book. We're going to talk about near misses, and then we're going to get into our top 5.
So I think you mean the Elm Street book rather than the Exorcist.
Oh, did I say Exorcist? That's Siren's book. Put Exorcist in the chat. This book. Tell us about this book.
Okay, well, that came about because one day, I'd just released my 3rd book in the space of about 2 years, and I was feeling a bit bold and a bit cheeky and a bit ambitious, I guess. And I was trying to think of what I really wanted to write about next. And one thing, because all my books have kind of come out of a very personal place, you know, in some case, very nostalgic kind of place, because they have to do with what influenced me when I was growing up as a young movie fan. So I was watching Freddy's Nightmares one day, which was the TV show spin-off of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Not terribly well regarded, but I just thought to myself one day, everything I've ever wanted to say about the Elm Street series is in this 44 episode, 2-season TV show. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool, because it's never been written about. It's barely been written about, you know, across the last 30 odd years. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool if, you know, I wrote a book about Freddy's Nightmares, you know, each episode getting its own little chapter and kind of talking to all the directors and actors and screenwriters and all that. I never thought to me for a second that that's not really going to sell. But like I say, I was a bit bold and cheeky and ambitious. So I said it to a commissioning editor who I had worked with previously. And she said, great idea. Don't think it's going to sell. However, how about a book on the entire franchise? And in that case, you can write about Freddy's Nightmares to your heart's content, but also bring in everything else. And I thought that was a great idea, because some of the Elm Street movies are some of my favorite movies, particularly the first one. Part 3 in particular is especially one of my favorites. Part 4, I love Part 6, but I love them all in some way, apart from the remake, obviously. And Freddy's versus Jason's I'm not too keen on. But anyway, so we agreed. I agreed with the publisher that a book on the entire franchise of A Nightmare on Elm Street would be a great idea, a lot of fun, and you know, I got to talk to a lot of people involved in the series, and especially what was interesting for me was I got a lot of people who don't pop up on the documentaries that you see on the extra features on the DVDs and Blu-rays. You know, they don't appear in the books about Elm Street or Wes Craven, of which there are quite a few. So I was really interested in getting kind of the people who don't normally talk about Elm Street. You know, of course, there was certain people I had to get, such as Robert Englund, who I did get, and he was fantastic. But for me, this book was really about the teams, and without trying to sound pretentious, the intellectual teams behind The Nightmare on Elm Street that Wes Craven really put in there in the first film, and which were developed further in the third film in particular. And you can see all these teams kind of woven throughout the TV show, and pretty much in all of the movies as well. Even the worst movies have something going on in there that relates back to what Wes Craven was trying to say about American society, you know, the kind of that whole issue between parents and kids that sometimes leads to psychological damage, you know, all these kind of ideas that Wes Craven was putting in there, and which Freddy Krueger as a character really represents. You know, even though he's a monster, he's a kind of you know, this ghostly apparition, whatever he is, but really what he represents is all these kind of psychological malaise that the kids are going through, and that in many ways the parents are going through as well. So you have a lot of conflicted relationships in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and they are everyday kind of relationships. You know, it's like the David Lynch Blue Velvet thing. It's kind of what's going on behind the white picket fence in middle class suburbia. And that's really what Wes Craven was getting at in many cases. And that's what really intrigued me in this franchise and what I really wanted to write about. And I saw a lot of those because there's so many episodes, I guess, in the TV show. I thought, wow, this is, you know, there's a lot going on here that is ripe for analysis, but you don't need the TV show for that. You could just look at one or two of the movies and it's all there as well. So I was just excited to dig in. So that was kind of my modus operandi, was to talk about the intellectual, psychological, sociological themes within the Elm Street franchise. And I spoke to a lot of people from pretty much all the movies, many people from the TV show. And that was it. That was kind of the basis of the book. And it has done very well. It's been very well received. And I'm proud of it. So here it is.
Could you mute yourself? Sorry, we're going to have to ask Wayne to mute himself occasionally, as we have an echo issue with Wayne's audio. I think it's because he's wearing a pink shirt, but I'm not sure. So, okay, thanks for that. Now, for those people interested in the book, I've already put the link in the chat. I can't remember if I put it in the main blurb, but I'll certainly edit it into as soon as the stream is finished. I do have the book here. Wayne was kind enough to send me a copy. And look at that, it's been autographed as well. Autographed.
Nice.
Nice.
but it does say that Freddy's coming for me, which is a bit disconcerting.
Heyo.
I'm curious to know from my other guests on the panel, before we start talking about these 2 decades of horror in particular, just sticking with the Elm Street franchise, if you saw that in the cinema, because I did, and I not only did I see it in the cinema, I blagged it because I was not 18 when it came out. I think the UK release of it was in, I want to say 83 or 84.
Yeah, it's in that ballpark.
Yeah, and again, I went with Martin, my tall friend that I also blagged getting into Extro. Me and him went to see Extro as a double bill with Scanners, I think it was, which was a double A when it originally came out. That was on re-release. And I remember that I had never been so vocal watching a horror film as I had when I watched Elm Street. I kept saying, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." Like, and it got like louder and louder. Martin kept saying, "Shut up, you're going to get us chucked out." So that was my experience of it. What about you, Inside Man? Did you see it on the big screen?
Yeah, I did. I actually saw the first 3 on the big screen. I couldn't believe. I mean, I was a big Wes Craven fan anyway, and when I saw it, I thought, "Wow, yeah, this is really got legs." And I was proven right. But no, I loved it. I really loved it. It was just really, an unusual kind of, out of the ordinary. I suppose sort of semi-supernatural, horror movie. I loved it. I really enjoyed it. It's still kind of, it's still pretty special to me that first one anyway.
It had things in it that you had actually had dreams about. Like, as soon as you had that shot where she ran up the stairs and the stairs turned to jelly.
Yeah, that's bizarre. Yeah.
How many times have you had that dream where you're having a nightmare where you're trying to run but you can't and your feet won't move?
Yeah, definitely.
That was, as soon as that was in the movie, I went, "Oh my God, I've had that dream." And then also that shot of him with his arms like that, stretched out down either side of the road, like a shadowy figure coming down the road. That again was an image straight out of nightmares I'd had. Fun time, my childhood. So but they were sort of, that he seemed to have got the nub of iconic images of the nightmares of teens, and kids. The boogeyman, I suppose. Freddy is the ultimate boogeyman, isn't he, really?
Yeah.
I'm sure Wayne's going to nod. So Gourd King, did you see this on the big screen, or were you too much of a wee whippersnapper at that time?
That movie came out you said it was 1984. That would have been not too long after I was born.
So you were like you were like a Cabbage Patch doll at that time.
Basically, yeah. I was a wee little gourd at that point. And I think I want to say I saw either Nightmare on Elm Street 4 or 5 in the theater, either Dream Child or Dream Warriors in the theater.
Right.
Like maybe a drive-in or something like that when I was younger. But I never got a chance to see any of the early ones till much later. In fact, my earliest memories of Nightmare on Elm Street were they had the TV show they used to play late at night.
Yeah.
Which I thought was actually kind of cool. It was kind of creep show-like, but
they released that on VHS over here, and it was like 4 episodes per cassette. And I remember renting out the first 2 and thinking it was actually not bad. And Robert Englund kind of bookended each episode, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of introduced it a bit like the Vincent Price kind of character.
Yeah, in essence, it's, the sort of a fairly decent sort of anthology series, really.
Yeah. Well, before we move on to discuss horror films in general of this very impressive era, I just want to give Wayne the chance to come back on our comments there about the influence of Freddy on horror.
Absolutely, yeah. I totally agree about Freddy's Nightmares. I mean, that's one of the things that caught me about it. Was I always say that, my Saturday morning cartoons were Freddy's Nightmares, because I didn't really grow up kind of watching your traditional kind of children's fare. So, Freddy's Nightmares used to be on in England and Ireland on Sky One, not long after Sky One started on a Friday night, and I think it was around 11:30 or 12 midnight. And so I'd get my dad to tape it for me, and then Saturday morning I'd get out of bed, run down, and put on the previous night's recording of Freddy's Nightmares. So that was my kind of Saturday morning cartoons. But around the same time, you have to remember that Dream Warriors Part 3 had come out on VHS, and Part 4 was in the cinema. They came out in quite rapid succession because of, I guess, the success of Part 3 and all that. So it was kind of Freddy mania when I was 4, 5, 6 years old. So I was in heaven because I just loved, I was fascinated by this figure. And I guess I caught him at the right time, because when Part 3 came out, it was really that kind of crossover period of, yes, the film was very dark and terrifying, but it was when Freddy was starting to become kind of a bit of a wiseacre. He was kind of throwing out the quips, and he had a lot of personality in Part 3. And then when it gets to Part 4, I mean, that's the whole MTV nightmare. It's very glossy, it's very action-packed. It's a Rennie Harlan movie at this point. So, and a big soundtrack. So you've the Vinyls, Sinead O'Connor, Billy Idol, Go West, loads of big artists at the time. And Freddie, he was a guest VJ on MTV one weekend, to promote it. So Freddie was starting to become this kind of pop cultural figure and icon at this stage. So I was very aware of him. So like I say, it was great because he had 4 in the cinema, 3 on VHS, Freddy's Nightmares on TV. And as you say, Lance, there was the VHS releases of Freddy's Nightmares where you got there were 2 full-length episodes, but each was split into 2 episodes. So you got your 4 half hours on those tapes, which was brilliant for an Elm Street fan because you were getting like 4 little Elm Street stories there. So so that was really the kind of period that got me into horror cinema in general, and Elm Street in particular. So Elm Street as an idea, as something I was interested in, had been percolating for many, many years. So after my Nick McLean book, which was my 3rd book, and I kind of had the opportunity then to pick my next topic, I wanted to write something about Elm Street. And I just thought, well, the films have kind of been written about, and there's been documentaries, so maybe there's probably not a market there for a franchise book. So I thought, Freddy's Nightmares, there's nothing on that, so maybe there'd be interest there. Wasn't really, so I ended up doing the franchise thing. So Freddy has meant something huge to me in terms of my interest in cinema and interest in horror in general. I mean, from Elm Street, came all my other interests, so starting with, Michael Myers and Halloween, the Friday the 13th movies, and all the kind of small, cool indie horror movies that came out in the 80s, and then working your way back to the new Hollywood, the great cinema of the 60s and 70s. But then to go back even further, go back all the way to early cinema, the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, and then you get into, Dracula, Frankenstein, and the classic Universal monsters. So for me, Elm Street and Freddy was the gateway to horror cinema, and in many ways, the gateway to cinema in general for me. So I owe Freddy a lot, in terms of my writing career and my interest in cinema.
At risk of the horrible echo machine, I just want to ask Wayne quickly, did you ever see, I know you didn't see it at the time, but did you ever subsequently, maybe at a horror film festival or something, ever get to see the first film on the big screen? Because watching that first film on the big screen is a very different experience to watching it on video.
I never did. The first Elm Street movie I saw in the cinema was actually Freddy vs. Jason, because I guess I was too young to be admitted to the original series when I was so young. But I did rent them religiously. Well, I got my father to rent them for me because he needed him to go up to the desk in the video shop to take them out. But and my father was very lenient. I think he looked at Freddy as kind of the modern equivalent of when he was growing up with Frankenstein and Dracula. He didn't look at them as kind of these, horrendous, child-killing monster kind of guy. He just looked at it as like a silly horror movie. It'd be grand, So that's how I was really able to get into Elm Street. I would love to see any of them on the big screen. For some reason, they've never really been re-released over here or shown in retrospectives or horror festivals. So if they ever do, of course, I'd be there.
Okay. So moving on. Hit that mute button, Wayne. There we go. So Great. Well, look, what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about near misses, because in order for me to get a top 5, this is one of the hardest lists I've ever had to do, if not the hardest. I had to create a top 10 just to work out what the top 5 were going to be. My number 1 was pretty clear from me from the get-go, but my 4 that came after that were really hard. Now, for those people watching in the chat, and there's 10 of you watching, thank you so much. Do like, subscribe. If you're really nice to me, do a shout out on your social media, share the stream. If you're double nice, buy Wayne's book as well, because it's very good. So, but what you can do is you can take part, but we have to say now we need to give some caveats. So, only films that take place in the known timeline of Earth, so in other words, from creation until 2023, are allowed. Anything that's set in the future, beyond the date that we're currently at, is not allowed. One of the reasons that I decided to do that is because otherwise Alien would have been everybody's number 1 pick, probably.
Yeah.
Almost certainly, because
it would have been my top 3.
And then if you picked Alien, you would have also had to have probably put Aliens in your top 5. And then we're already kind of more into a science fiction, and we're going to do a top 5 sci-fi of the same era. That's gonna be happening in a few weeks. Nice. So I want to keep films that were eligible for that category out. However, there are some sci-fi horror crossovers that took place in the known Earth timeline. I'm not going to say what they are. Everybody knows what they are. Those are allowed in your choices. So, you know, a horror film with Donald Sutherland in it, for example, that has a sci-fi element, would be allowed in this top 5. Now, so I'm going to go around and talk about near misses, and I'm also going to talk about a couple of favorites of mine that some people probably won't have seen. And this also comes under the near miss category because it's not in my top 5. It's not even in my top 5 list, and I will share my my 5 runners up. But one of the films I always thought was a very, very clever. It was straight to video in the UK. It was released under a different name in the States. Was The Prowler. I always thought that this film was rather good. It was released as Rosemary's Killer in the UK, and this is the entertainment in video. If people remember those white EV cases that also house the likes of Troll and I think Ghoulies. They had a lot of the Charles Band films were on those. And the premise was a pretty simple one. It was about the initial setup was set in the 1940s, and it was about a jilted GI coming back from the war. And the voiceover at the beginning of the film is his jilted. He's getting a Dear John letter. He's getting the letter that's saying his girlfriend is dumping him while he's away fighting overseas, doing the honourable thing. And he comes back with his GI clobber on and turns up at the graduation where his ex-girlfriend is, who's now giving her cherry to somebody else, and kills them both in rather spectacular fashion. We fast forward, I think, to the early 1970s. It's the night of the prom in the same town again. The sheriff is about to go on holiday. Unfortunate coincidence that, leaving the junior detective in town. And Rosemary was the name of the girl who was killed in the 40s. People start dying again, and people are trying to work out the connection. And now, though it very much was kind of a stalk and slash, I really liked the fact that it was a GI who killed people either with a pitchfork or a bayonet, although pitchforks were not generally GI standard issue. It's like a combination between a pitchfork and a rake. You can see it here. But the other thing I really liked about it was it kept you guessing as to who was the murderer right up until the final frame, and that was really well done. So it was for the kind of the straight to video, you know, B movies, which actually turned out to be pretty good. Rosemary's Killer is my favorite that falls into that category. So I'd be interested to hear before we get onto our near misses, which will tend to be a bit more spectacular, I'd be interested to hear from other people if they've got a choice in a similar vein that could be Critters, for example. So, Inside Man, do you have something similar to this? A favourite that you liked that is perhaps a bit not brilliant film, but Parasite maybe.
Yeah. I mean, Parasite's actually a really good example.
It is a good example,
and it's not a bad film actually.
What, like Parasite? Is this alternatively named here? Because
I think it came out the same year. Parasite 1981. There you go. There's
That's because there's a movie I have that was kind of ill known that is about a parasite, but I don't think it's named Okay, so yeah, it's a different movie than this. Okay.
82 in the UK, I think 81 in the US. A very young Demi Moore was in it. Are you saying that's your choice, Inside Man? I kind of thrust that upon you.
Yeah, you kind of did, but I'd go with that. But also, something like Maniac Cop.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I'm a big Bill Lustig fan, so
you just took my one.
Yeah, there we go.
Wayne.
Maniac Cop is actually one of the ones on my short list of 30 films, by the way.
Yeah.
And I saw Maniac Cop at the cinema. I thought it was good. I thought it could have been better.
Yeah.
I thought it could have been better, but it was good. I got the feeling it might have been cut for the UK.
I'd say
the original.
Oh, sorry, Wayne. Go on.
Yeah, the original VHS was quite heavily edited.
All I remember is when I saw it in the cinema, it felt like it had been cut.
Yeah, and I think part 3 in particular was heavily edited when it came to VHS. But I actually think part 2 is probably the best of the 3 of them.
It's very good. Very good film.
Really, really good action film. And considering the budget that they were made on, it speaks to William Lustig, what a great kind of B-movie filmmaker.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, okay. Wayne, you're going to have to mute yourself again. Hover over that mute button, sir. That's where your finger needs to be all night. That sounded ruder than I intended. Army of Darkness, that's a good question. Would you class Army of Darkness as a horror film? I would. It's a comedy horror. It's one of the ones that straddles the genre, but one of the genres is horror, and it's also set within the known timeline of history, even though starts in the present day, goes to the past. Inside Man, thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I like it. I do like it. It's not, it's not my favorite, but it's certainly, for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's really well worth a visit. Yeah, it's got some things going on there. Yeah, I like it.
So Gourd King, would you have a B movie that you've got a bit of a soft spot for, but isn't necessarily in your top 5 or even a top 10?
I mean, I have a couple that are probably sort of considered B movies, but they're one of them's a well-known B movie. The other one actually, I mean, it's not a very well-known one, but I don't know if it would quite be called a B movie because I think it's actually a genuinely well-made film. I'll use that one. Is 1987's The Hidden, which is kind of
mate, I saw that on video in the States.
That is. I remember I've seen that like several times over when I was younger. Watched it again fairly recently. That one came fairly close to me. I think it ended up at like number 9 for me overall. I absolutely love that movie. It's creepy. It's interesting. It's got some really great, like the opening car chase scene is fantastic. And I remember first watching that and I was like, this is just a really cool action movie. Okay, and then it's got that just horrifying looking parasite that's inside of him that he basically puts into someone else's mouth. I'm like, it's phenomenal. I love it.
Yeah, what a great soundtrack it has as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Concrete Blonde, fucking amazing.
It's got a really fit Claudia Christian before she did Babylon 5 in that film, playing a stripper who then gets possessed by the alien and carries a shotgun round.
Yeah,
and
when
drive-
Babylon 5 came out, which I haven't seen Babylon 5, but I remember seeing her on it. I was like, I know that woman from somewhere. And then I was like, oh, I learned who she was probably too young.
And I like that scene with the chunky guy. I want that car. Yes, don't worry, sir. I'll show you another car. No, I want this car. And it's, yeah, it all kind of goes rather horrible for those guys from
Oh, yeah.
there on in. And yeah, do you know what? It's a really good B movie. I've got it on DVD. When there wasn't enough tickets for Roger Rabbit, this is in my book 1988. Those of us that couldn't get into Roger Rabbit went to see The Hidden, and I had already seen it, so I knew they were going to be in for a good time.
Yeah.
But you know, I missed out on seeing Roger Rabbit at the Odeon Leicester Square because of that. Never mind.
Criminally underrated movie.
It is. It's very criminally underrated. I'd recommend it to people in chat who haven't seen it. Keith is mentioning the original Fly, which doesn't fall into the required time range. Phase 4, 1974. That is quite a creepy movie. That was part of the BBC science fiction series on BBC Two, when they also showed a lot of oldies, like It Came From Outer Space, the original Invaders from Mars, and a whole load of others, and that was shown at the same time. I remember that. Okay, well let's move on to near misses, the ones that didn't make it onto the top 10. I mean, my list of films that I want to give a shout out to is massive. I'm going to mention. I'm not going to discuss them. I'm going to mention several that I think are really good horror films within this period that haven't made it onto my top 5. They're not even on my top 10, but definitely would be in my top 20. Would be Arachnophobia, which came out in 1990. Near Dark, The Stepfather, very, very, very good film.
Good film. Yeah.
Believe it or not, Evil Dead 2 is not in my top 10 even, but I absolutely love that film. I think it's amazing. They Live, which I've got a huge cinema quad of right behind me, is another one. Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead are not in my top 10 even, but I love all of that series. Think they're fantastic. And then I have a real soft spot for Salem's Lot, but you could only really include the feature film version of that because the full version was only shown on television. It didn't get a cinema release, and we're doing movies, not TV. So if you put it down as your feature film pick, I'd say that's a bad choice because the feature film version of it was really badly hacked to bits, and it's nowhere near as good. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's still really good. I watched it about 2 weeks ago, and that stuff with the kids rapping on the windows is still as creepy as fuck. So those are my ones. Wayne, let's go to you and tell us some of your kind of near misses.
Well, this is strange because I consider these perhaps two of my favorites, even though they are near misses in terms of my list. My list, like the Burt Reynolds one, is comprised of personal favorites for personal reasons, but I would consider these absolute masterpieces that are easily among my favorite films of all time, and they are The Shining and The Exorcist. And they're almost too perfect, you know, in terms to talk about. I mean, you could talk about them all night because they are the best of everything of their respective filmmakers. I mean, The Shining, I don't even know where to start. They are just, I could watch them anytime and you could analyze them to death. But I think The Exorcist in particular holds a particularly special place in my heart because I saw it first when the ban was lifted in Ireland in 1999, and I had never seen it before that. So I went to see it with my dad, and the two of us were completely shocked. We were shell shocked. You know, we just didn't know what to expect. We went in expecting just a horror movie, you know, and we were blown away by the realism of it, by the themes, the whole thing with the family and the mother and the daughter, and of course the religious element, because when you grow up in Ireland, especially the period in which my dad grew up, you know, he was born in the late 30s, early 40s. You know, religion in Ireland was a heavily oppressive thing. And I think even for me, I kind of came at the tail end of, you know, church going and all that kind of things, but it was still there. It was still there in society and in the family at this stage. So the religious element of The Exorcist really hit us hard, you know, and the fact that it's treated as serious as it is by Friedkin and Blatty, that it's not treated as some schlock horror scenario. It might as well be a very well shot, well made documentary, the way that the teams are treated. And I think it's one of the greatest films of all time for many reasons. And I think the same of The Shining. And I don't like to write The Shining off as just the story of, you know, an alcoholic going mad, you know, in isolation. I do love all those mad, crazy conspiracy theories that go on about The Shining, because I think there's so much depth there to the film and to the original story that you could easily go down a rabbit hole and, you know, pick apart all these things. So it's ripe for analysis, depending on no matter what way you want to go at it. So they're just two great, brilliant masterpieces of cinema, but they didn't make my top 5 because the other 5 just edged them on personal reasons, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Neither of those are on my list. I've never watched The Exorcist since I saw it the first time, and I haven't wanted to watch it again. That's not to say that it's not a good film and doesn't deserve a rewatch. I just don't want to see it again. Maybe that's a sign of a good horror film. Maybe it's a sign of a film that's really disturbing. Either way, I just did not want to watch it again. The Shining is one of those films that I've only been able to watch about 3 times, and it's for similar reasons. It's very, very disturbing, but it's much more beautiful to watch, whereas the aesthetic of The Exorcist, like Wayne said, has a more documentary feel, which for me even makes it even more real, which makes it like more disturbing. So
yeah. I think the thing about The Exorcist is that it's a movie that does challenge you. It doesn't.
Oh God, yeah.
You know, it certainly isn't. You know, a painted by numbers kind of movie, but it's an extremely challenging film. It's a challenging film to watch as a viewer, but it challenges you morally, intellectually, and definitely emotionally. And I do enjoy films that give me that kind of challenge, the ones that are difficult watches. And that certainly is a difficult watch. Haven't seen it for a while, but agree with Wayne. I mean, it's an absolute masterpiece. It's an incredibly special film.
Mm-hmm.
The same with The Shining as well.
I think that it's a great example of how well Friedkin made that film. When you look at the sequels, and they are enjoyable in their own way, but if you look at John Boorman's Exorcist 2, The Heretic, which is just all kinds of crazy, you know, but a completely different approach to the material, which is a lot more schlocky. Now it's kind of scary in places, but for different reasons. It's not making you question anything. It's not an intellectual piece, but it's loud, it's brash, and it's more of a typical kind of just straight up loud, scary horror movie.
Yeah.
Part 3, I think, which was directed by William Peter Blatty, he tried to take it back to more the kind of the intellectual roots of Friedkin's film, and there's some really dark, disturbing stuff in that, but it just doesn't quite have Friedkin's filmmaking panache. You know, Blatty was very good, considering he wasn't, you know, a prolific director or anything like that. But then you get into like Exorcist 4, the 2 versions of Exorcist 4, one of which was Rennie Harlin, the other was Paul Schrader, and neither of them are particularly good. But again, interesting to see how 2 directors approached the same material. Rennie Harlin approached it as, again, this kind of high-octane adventure horror movie, whereas Schrader tried to do a Blatty on it and tried to be a little bit more serious and kind of austere, but it just didn't quite work. The story wasn't there. So I think when you look at all the sequels, the whole franchise, you especially realize just how special Friedkin's original was, and just in terms of being a new Hollywood movie as well. I mean, it's up there with The Godfather, Jaws, Deliverance, all the greats. So apart from being a masterpiece of a horror, it's just one of the great American films, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Fab stuff. Thanks, Wayne. Honourable mentions Inside Man. Any that you want to mention quickly, and then to you, Gourd King, and then we'll get into our number 5 pick. And once we start our number 5 pick, everybody watching, you can join in, and we'll get into that again in just a second. So,
Evil Dead, I think, is going to have to be there. I wish I could have put it into, my 5. I do enjoy it. I love it. I don't love it as much as others. It's good for a rewatch. But it was a pretty significant film. I think both you and I, Lance, we remember exactly what it was like when that movie was released. And the video nasty brigade that kind of
Mary Whitehouse and her
Mary
nasty
Whitehouse.
ban list, which included anything by Dario Argento or
Lucio Fulci and
Michael Winner.
Michael Winner.
Michael Winner. Yeah.
I mean, Cannibal Holocaust probably should have been banned in any sensible country, but and I mean, sure, Wayne could write an interesting book about that. But there was, and Last House on the Left is a pretty disturbing movie.
That's a movie. Yeah, that is a movie.
That is a movie. But there were films on it that should not have been banned for sure. We got very, very heavily edited horror films as a result of that. My Bloody Valentine. I still don't think I've seen the uncut original version of that. I've seen the remake.
I think it was a list of 72, wasn't it? I think there was a list of
a
list of 72 movies, and a lot of them were mainstream movies. And
this is a montage of the 70s ones here that I've put up on screen. And it's amazing when I had a look at this, how many I hadn't even considered. Like Don't Look Now, for example, isn't immediately on my radar as a horror film. It's more of a disturbing dark thriller. Clockwork Orange, of course, many people would consider a horror film. For me, it's just completely fucked up. But again, some people think it's genius. For me, it's not a film I ever wanted to watch again. So it just wasn't for me. And then there's, in the 70s, we still have the last breaths of the kind of Hammer horror stuff and the old school Dracula. So the range of horror in the 70s was really good, and it was the good stuff in the 70s that led to the people that sort of were wanting to make films in the 80s, the new wave of horror, if you like, which were your the Freddy Kruegers and Wes Craven and so on. Now, there's a great quote in Wayne's book, which I wrote out here. I'm just going to illustrate, and this comes from the man who did the foreword for his book, and I think it sums up really well how horror was viewed at this time, probably right up until Misery came out. I think that might have been a film that really reinterpreted horror for a lot of people. And it says, we were the gutter of Hollywood. We played among ourselves and occupied a social status sandwiched in between porn stars and late night TV lawyers. Most of us made considerably less money than both. And I think that's a really good quote about how, horror filmmakers were perceived, particularly in the late 70s, going into the 80s, particularly with the video boom, when you could make a cheap horror film for not a lot of money, you could get it out into the video market and you could sell it. And that's what brought out the Italian directors, of course, with all of their content as well. So it changed everything. And Mary Whitehouse was indeed a woman marketing department for the horror genre. Very well put, David. But they were seen as a cut above. A cut below everybody else. They were seen like the lower class and only one rung above porn. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, but they're constantly labeled with the epithet pornographer. Excuse me. They're always called pornographers. Pornographers of blood. Pornographers of violence. I mean, come on. Their movies. They're trying to tell us that. Seriously, tell us that we are unable to distinguish between a piece of entertainment that we're watching on a big screen and the realities of life. And people like Mary Whitehouse and her little, morality brigade used to get their little Wincey and knickknacks and a twist every time something like this came out. And it just, it baffles me. It just baffles me when, because I'm completely anti-censorship, totally anti-censorship, and this kind of thing, when it happened, as you said, Lance, quite rightly, she was probably the biggest marketing tool that these things these movies could ever have wished for.
Yeah, indeed. I'll just before we move on, I'll just put 80s in, and you'll get a similar palette of covers here. And of course, you can see the change in the type of horror film in that decade. They were much more colorful. Some of them were slightly less grim in terms of the tone of the color palette, and then you also had a lot of genre jumping around. So Predator was an action horror movie with a dab of science fiction. The Fly reinterpretation was, that was a 70% horror film, but I'd say 30% sci-fi. Aliens is a 70% sci-fi with a very strong 30% of horror. And we could argue those figures, but you had a lot of things that crossed over. And then there was a lot of your indie straight to video stuff like The Stuff, Funhouse, Toxic Avenger, Happy Birthday to Me, which was called something else in the UK, Swamp Thing, From Beyond, the Lovecraft thing. All the kind of low budget film companies were all getting in on the action. There was a number of Stephen King adaptations for the first time, I think, not for the first time, because we had one in the 70s, but there were more in the 80s, and there were some that went straight to video. Let's not mention the Langoliers. I'm sure that's not on anyone's near miss list. But there were. But
it's funny. But it's funny, actually looking at that now. Wayne's really hit the nail on the head with when he mentions about the MTV generation. There's a kind of a slickness, a kind of an MTV slickness to a lot of those from the mid 80s.
You can see the change in the posters. Exactly. It's between those two decades. And
I think a lot of that came down to the editing as well, which was, I think, between MTV and the kind of commercial horror movies. There was and the soundtracks, of course, as well, which kind of tied in and kind of influenced the editing as well. Talking to the guys on part 4 who worked on that, obviously the cutting is influenced by the music and vice versa. So there's a whole thing going on, relationship between music and the pacing of these films as well. And just to reference Walter Hill, who we discussed recently as well, when we were talking about Streets of Fire. You look at the scenes in Streets of Fire, which are the concert moments, which are, you look at them now and they might as well be music videos. And when I asked Walter about that, he was saying that he had never seen a music video or watched MTV in his life. But when you look at that film, it might as well have been edited by MTV's people. So there was a lot. I think the soundtracks had a lot to do with the use of kind of needle drop soundtracks, using pop songs and rock songs to kind of give these films some kind of hyper intensity, which influenced their editing and their style. So I think there's the relationship between cinema and MTV, especially in the horror genre, in the 80s is very important to know.
Agreed. Well, I don't know whether to mention the 5 that are in my top 10. And by the way, I've just changed one of them.
Well, you're so fickle.
I've just moved one of them around. Well, I've gone back and forth on this list so many times. So, and I know that there'll be eruptions in the chat if I say that my 5 runner-ups that are not in my top 5. But I'm perfectly prepared to go into battle to justify the 5 that I have.
Yeah, definitely. Same.
My 5 runner-ups. So this would have been my top 10. So this is my 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 choices. Number 10 would have been Halloween. Number 9 would have been Poltergeist. Number 8, Nightmare on Elm Street. And that was previously in my top 5 for a long time. Number 7 6, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which also was in my top 5 for a very long time.
That's a great one.
Probably one of the most terrifying endings.
Oh, it's awful.
Oh,
in the movie ever. Hey, Retro Nerd Girls here.
Yeah,
Hey.
I had Invasion as one of my honorable mentions also.
Yeah, I mean it's one of the few films that's a remake that's definitely, I think it's better than the original. The original's very good. Not going to take anything away from the original, but this is a completely different kind of movie. And I didn't realize when I watched it as a kid, and it was one of those films that it was on and I watched on the black and white telly upstairs. So the first time I saw it, it was in black and white. Yeah. And actually, if you watch it in black and white, it works really well because it does look like an old black and white movie. And the scene with the guy's head on the dog, I didn't understand what I was watching, and seeing that in black and white was really strange. Let me tell you. But it's a great film with balls because it didn't take the easy way out on the end.
No, not at all.
The guy who plays the lead in the original is the guy who plays the evil scientist in Inner Space, which we did a stream about Inner Space and Fantastic Voyage. Actually, that's I think that's one of the retro review streams we did. He's the doctor that gets, him and his female cohort, they get shrunk and they have to stand on top of each other to use the phone box. Yeah, that's the lead from the original. And Carrie was my other one. Carrie was also in my top 5 for a long time. That's probably the first horror film I watched all the way through. Yeah. And the one that caused my mum to come running into the room when I screamed at the ending when the hand came out the gravestone. Yeah. And grabbed the girl. My God, that shot. Oh man. So those are my other near misses. Has anyone got any other honorable mentions before we do number 5? We've almost been going an hour already. So
yeah. I'd
get cracking.
A lot of mine that I'd considered were, you all already mentioned, Evil Dead 2 didn't make mine. Arachnophobia, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Halloween did not make my top 5. You mentioned you were talking about movies that crossed over into genres a lot. I kind of set a personal standard, whereas if I didn't see them as at least 50-50, I wouldn't even consider them. So that's why I didn't even think of Predator as horror, because I'm like, that to me is more action sci-fi. So I just left it off.
Same. I mean, I would have let somebody include it because of the rules that I set, because it is set in the current timeline, so you can include it. Whereas you can't include Alien. People in chat.
Yeah, Alien was originally in my top 5. Funny enough, I would, even though I actually like Aliens more, probably because I see that as more just sci-fi action with a little bit of horror, I would not have included that. But I thought about it. The toughest one for me to even discern whether I would even consider it was Jaws, because I'm like, it terrified me as a kid, but as an adult, I more just see it as this kind of, adventure thriller almost in a way. So I was like, I don't really see it as a horror movie now, but it terrified me when I was a kid. And then a couple other honorable mentions I had were Dawn of the Dead, The Fly, and Fright Night. I love Fright Night.
I saw that at the cinema. And The Fly, actually.
Fright Night. I actually watched that fairly recently again. I just said that movie's so much fun. It's so much fun.
All right, well, let's get into it. We're going to have to take down our amusing introductory banner that's scrolling across the screen and put up this one that I prepared earlier. Our number 5 pick. So now, if we pick one that's in your list already, but at a different spot, we're going to talk about it now. So anything you may want to say about it, you may want to say now, but you don't have to say if it's in your list until we get to it. Remember, if you're in chat, you can take part. I better get my big board and a pen again, hadn't I? So I'm going to write down the scores. And there we go. I had a blank one. That's good. Very good. Very good. So we'll see what we've got. So number 5, I'm going to let Wayne start so we can get the Econis out of the way quickly. What is your number 5, Wayne? And why?
Okay, my number 5 is Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesh Eaters. Okay, so I'm not a big gore hound, but I do think that this is an amazing piece of work. I mean, of all the Italian zombie movies, of all the Living Dead knockoffs, of all the great Italian master horror movies, I think this is fantastic for many reasons. I think it's just the right side of gritty and grimy and grindhouse, but still having some kind of masterful direction to it. I mean, it's extremely suspenseful while also being as gory as hell. And I think the score, which is this kind of weird, it's part 70s disco-y vibe, but part cheesy early 80s synth. I think it's like what, 78, 70, 79 or whatever. But just the whole vibe of the film is just kind of insidious and creepy. And it's grimy and dirty, and it's not normally the kind of horror movie I like, but there's just something about it. And the acting is quite good in it. You know, a lot of these Italian zombie movies, even though it has a lot of the actors that are in, a lot of the other bad ones or worse ones, for some reason Fulci gets good performances in this. If you see it on a nice widescreen print, it's beautifully filmed. New York, you know, late 70s, looking gritty and grimy. And then there's the Caribbean setting, which just kind of is a nice contrast to that. And then, of course, you have a scene in which a shark fights a zombie. And how many movies do you get to see that? You know, so I'm all about zombie flesh eaters. You know, I just love it. I think Fulci is a great filmmaker anyway, but this is his best work. And it's just one of my favorite horror films in particular of the 70s. So that's my number 5.
I'm glad we've got an Italian B movie in there. We've definitely got to have an Italian B movie in this list. So okay, Zombie Flesh Eaters is number 1. Chat, I've given you the go ahead to take part with your number 5 pick. Make sure you prefix your pick by putting as JPen14, who's put it. We'll include that. Now that's the original It, which went straight to video in the UK. I believe it did have a limited cinema release in the US.
It was I don't remember it being in the theater, but it was a made for TV.
It was like, I'll allow it. Kind
of like Salem's Lot. Basically.
We've got one vote for. We're allowing Salem's Lot, so we'll allow the miniseries It. Where I like the South Park version of it, where the big spider from It appears at the end of the episode about the Catholic priest. But I digress. So David Macy is picking the Omen. Gourd King, what's your number 5 pick?
My number 5 is from 1990. It is Rob Reiner's Misery, obviously adapted from the Stephen King novel, which I have never read, by the way. I haven't read a ton of Stephen King, but I saw Misery not too long after it was in theaters. We rented it, and Kathy Bates, that is one of the best female villain performances of all time. She's absolutely terrifying and really funny also.
She really is. She really is a dirty birdie.
She's actually
really is.
I will say that Misery is also on my list.
Okay,
it's further down.
Okay.
It's the one that I picked from 1990. I agree with you on all counts.
And James Caan, I think, gives a very underrated performance in it. He's fantastic in the movie.
Yeah.
I think it's his best performance of his career.
I probably would agree with you.
Down. And you know, considering that he's doing most of that performing just laying on a bed.
I saw it.
But it's in the eyes.
I saw it on the opening night in Leicester Square at the Odeon, which, as Inside Man will tell you, is a huge cinema. You seat 900 people in there. Yeah. It was packed out. There wasn't a spare seat. And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know it was based on a Stephen King book. I do remember I was in a bad mood. I thought, what haven't I seen? I looked up, I saw that, and I was a big Jimmy Caan fan. Didn't know who Kathy Bates was, and thought, well, this looks good. And they had a huge poster with it that had a neon sign behind the main logo that was sort of has a crack in it, if I remember rightly. We'll get it up on the screen in a second. I mean, for me, it's a 10 out of 10 on IMDb.
Yeah, it's excellent. It has really strong cast, even though it's a fairly limited one. Lauren Bacall, who was probably the first like much older woman who I was like, oh wow, she's a really beautiful woman. Then of course I learned a little bit about, the history of her, and I was like, oh, okay, so she was like, one of the sirens of the golden age, basically.
Yeah.
But Richard Farnsworth is great as the
He's
sheriff.
fantastic in it.
He's so good in that. And then everyone usually remembers the scene, of course, with the sledgehammer and the boards, but I swear the scene that I've always found the most intense is where she's out buying him typing paper and he's just rolling through her house after escaping and then has to get back. And I'm like, that scene has just put you on the edge of your seat. It does it for me every single time.
And the
put you on
penguin,
edge.
isn't it? The penguin.
Yeah. My broken penguin always faces northwest. You've been a naughty boy or whatever.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And you think he's got away with it, and that's really well played in the film. I've just put up I'm trying to put up stills about each film we talk about. This is Zombie Flesh Eaters in action. And you can actually see that Wayne has based his look on this actor from Zombie Flesh Eaters. Pretty similar, Wayne. You just tuck in your hair and go for a quiff.
He's a very handsome man.
Yeah. He's got a Daily Planet t-shirt on as well. And the guy behind him looks exactly like our bad guy villain from Terminator 2, who also plays Death in Bill and Ted 2. It's not him, I don't think, but it doesn't all.
Yeah, he does.
Not Bill Sadler.
Patrick.
William Sadler.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, William Sadler. So those are some shots from Zombie Flesh Eaters, including Shark versus Zombie. Look at the bullet hole he's got in his chin there. This actor I've seen in quite a few things. Can't remember his name. He's a Brit. Can't remember.
Ian McCulloch.
Ian McCulloch, right. Yeah, not a bad actor by any means. I need to see this film again. So thanks for the reference with this one. I think I did see it because it was one of those ones that somebody would have around somebody's house, and 6 of us would go around after school to watch it. So
it was one of those. It was one of the banned ones as well. One of the DVDs.
Yeah, it
was. I remember the first time I saw it was on a proper, 10th generation dupe bootleg VHS. As you can imagine, is the proper way to see Zombie Flesh Eaters.
Yeah, it is.
It's just almost indecipherable. But as I say, when you do get around to seeing the nice Blu-ray versions, it is gorgeous. But that's one thing I miss about discovering these movies for the first time. It's not the same when you get the Blu-ray deluxe edition. I think you really had to see some of these films on some kind of dodgy knockoff backstreet VHS. Yeah. So that's one thing I miss.
Other votes for number 5 pick, we've got Evil Dead 2. We've got one for the Omen. So these are all scoring 1 point each, guys. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's that first time experience of nervously watching a horror film that is naughty and you're not supposed to see round a mate's house, and that's why everybody was round there, because that's how I saw the Thing the first time, which we may discuss later. But just going back to Misery briefly and looking at the poster on the Odeon Leicester Square, they had a massive version of this, and what they did was the house, they had a kind of a 3D huge cardboard cutout of the house, and they had a neon light behind it. So there was a light shining out of the big poster on the front of the cinema, and then the word Misery was backed with neon red as well. So you can imagine what the front of that cinema looked like at night. It was great, and I just happened to stroll in about half an hour before it was about to go up, and I said, "Don't suppose you've got any tickets left?" Because this is when Friday night was a big thing. Mm-hmm. And they said, "How many, sir?" "Just one, please." Yeah, I think we've got one. That's when I used to sit in the cinema pretending to review the film. I think what's so striking about Misery is, more than most horror movies, this one's pretty plausible. Yeah. I mean, it would be less plausible probably today, kind of our social media age with phones. It'd be a little bit harder to pull off but when it came out, it was like, this is not all that far-fetched. When compared to most horror films, like, this could happen. It was scary in that way. I'm sure people have done it. This would make an absolutely great stage play.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure people have done it. I don't know whether people include the Richard Farnsworth storyline or not, but and actually Melissa, who comes on and does my Lone Wolf streams with me, would be perfect to play the Kathy Bates roles. Right?
I'd actually like to. I'd like to see this as a jazz musical.
That's a whole different stream. On that note, Inside Man, what is your number 5 pick?
Clive Barker's Hellraiser.
Hellraiser. Oh, no,
Yeah.
that will tear your soul apart. Okay.
And it was when I first kind of found out about this, I hadn't at that particular time read The Hellbound Heart, upon which it's based. But the first thing I knew about this was I was at Shepperton Studios, where Bob King's special makeup effects artist, he had a workshop there. And I was in there talking to him, and Hellraiser, they were just prepping up for Hellraiser, so they had all the Frank makeups, and it was Bob King and Jeff Portes who were doing. I think Jeff did the Pinhead makeups and everything. And I thought, what on earth is this? And Bob said, it's this new. I do Bob King's voice. What's this new movie called Hellraiser? And I thought, sounds pretty interesting. And I thought, get the Hellbound Heart. Had a read, went to see the movie, and it blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. I thought it was completely original, really beautifully directed, fantastically well acted. Didn't like any of the characters, which is great because it's I don't mind movies where I don't like the characters. But it was it was a pretty grim and gruesome and beautiful watch.
Controversial, but I preferred Hellbound Hellraiser 2 to the first one.
Yeah.
There you go. You know what? I hated in the first movie? It just because it disturbed me. I hated that mattress.
Oh yeah.
The dirty mattress, and I had a bit of blood on it, and they kept trying to get the guy to go on it. I think it was, bless him, Andrew Robinson, who I met, who played Garrick in Deep Space Nine, who's a lovely man in person.
Andy Robinson.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you mean, the Scorpio from Dirty Harry?
Yeah.
And what an amazing actor.
He's an amazing actor, and I got to meet him at Destination Star Trek 2 years ago, and was absolutely wankered on Prosecco at the time. So I had the courage to go up to him and several other Star Trek actors, but I knew everything about all their work, so I endeared myself to them despite my innate ramblings. He's a fab actor.
He really is a good actor.
So Hellraiser, I have a feeling Hellraiser might pop up again today, and we've also got a vote from Retro Nerd Girl for Salem's Lot. We gave that a special mention, actually, Retro, before you came on. Still, for me, holds up really well. Great storytelling. First adaptation of Stephen King ever? I think it probably was. I think it was the first, because I think Carrie was 76. I think. And Salem's Lot was 75. So that's
was Salem's Lot that early? I thought it was about 78-ish.
Don't know. I thought it was early. I've got
Salem's Lot was 79 and Carrie was 76.
Oh, okay. It was 79 Retro. So she put 75 there. That's 79 Retro. Okay, yeah. It was shown as a 2-part thing on British TV, and everybody scared the shit out of everybody, and we all talking about it at school. Definitely a good entry into this decade of horror for sure. Yep, 79. Yep. Okay. So Hellraiser for you. It's a good one. I met one of the cast, by the way, of Hellraiser, funnily enough, in an adult store, and no, I was with my missus at the time. This was in like Ann Summers, and it was
Ah.
it was really unfortunate that I bumped into it. Literally, also we were looking at things and kind of bumped into it. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, weren't you in Hellraiser? And I said that before, and I wouldn't have engaged him at all if I'd realised when I nudged into him he was holding a massive dildo that he was about to go and buy at the counter. So that was
Nice.
a really embarrassing moment for me, especially as we both worked in the industry and would bump into each other later. Neither of us mentioned the incident. So it is, I've got one of these for every movie, don't worry. Yeah, it is a good film. It's not on my top 5. It was a little bit too out there for me. But I can appreciate that it's great and it has legion of fans.
Yeah, I think really. I mean, I knew I'd read some of the books of Blood, so I knew some of Clive Barker's stuff, and I knew he was, pretty sort of wacky in some of the things that he'd written. When I found out that he was directing as well as having this based on his own work, oh yeah, this is going to be pretty good. But yeah, if you haven't read The Hellbound Heart or any of Clive Barker's books of Blood, I'd highly recommend them.
I'm going to be very quick on my number 5 pick because I don't think that there's a lot to say about it that hasn't been said by numerous people. But I will say why it's number 5 for me. So until this movie, I had probably seen about 3 films at the cinema, and then everybody was talking about this film at school, and we weren't allowed to go and see it, and I was very upset about this. Fortunately, the film was such a phenomenal success that it was re-released in the UK a year later, and one of the kids at my school organised it to go and see it for his birthday, a kid called Elliot Florio. So, I just didn't tell my parents what the movie was that we were going to see. Go to cinema to see this film, probably Star Wars again, because I'm pretty sure 77 was when I actually did get to see it. Anyway, this is Jaws. So for me as a kid, the scene where the guy's body comes out the boat, which was the scariest moment in the film, stuck in my mind for a really long time. And also as a filmmaker, this is when I understood what the genre of horror was. Yeah. And I think it's also the perfect example early on of a synergy between how to use music to create suspense in a horror film and mood, and also the music also represented the creature, of course, and then combined with good special effects, and then the golden lesson of if it's a monster film that you're doing, the less you show of the monster, the better.
Yeah.
And you only got tidbits of the first time we actually saw the shark, which I think was definitely over the halfway mark into the movie properly, was when Richard Dreyfuss is chucking the shark feed into the bait into the water.
Oh,
suddenly
Roy Scheider.
Yeah, Roy Scheider.
Oh, is it Roy Schneider? That's right.
Yeah,
and because that then leads to we're going to need a bigger boat line. So this went back and forth in my top 10, like several times. Yeah. This was with Invasion of the Body Snatchers at one point, and it went back because I think Invasion probably is the more superior horror film. But in terms of what this meant to me with my own journey into the world of horror, this was the gateway drug, if you like. So, and it's the first horror film I ever saw in the cinema, and I still think it holds up well today. I think it's fair to say, as mentioned by Gourd King earlier, that it's almost become more of a family soft horror drama because it's been superseded by so many things, especially in terms of gore, that kids that see it now, they probably wouldn't get it.
I think it's as perfect a film as that you could possibly see. It's a beautifully shot film, beautifully photographed, fantastically well acted, a great adaptation of Peter Benchley's novel. In my opinion, superior to the book.
I was going to say that I think it's better than the book.
Yeah, there are a few adaptations that are anywhere clear as close as well clear of the book. I mean, this is the one. This is the pinnacle, I think.
Yeah, I've read the book, and the book's got a lot of waffle in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of the context of horror, I'm going to put it out there and say that I think Jaws 2 feels more like an actual horror film, just in generic terms.
I saw Jaws 2 at the cinema. Same kid. Another birthday.
Yeah, and it's a good film. I do think Jaws 2 is kind of an underrated sequel.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it has got that kind of teen horror element to it, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit, definitely. It's just the ending of it's where the way they beat the shark. It's really corny. And Jaws 2, kind of get the sense they were trying to one up the one-liner that he delivers at the end of Jaws, and it comes off a little funny.
Smile, you son of a bitch.
Yeah, that line's great, but like Jaws 2, he's just saying open wide. So it's like, stop. But yeah, if I had included Jaws amongst my horror movies, it would have been at number 3 for me. It would have gone very high for me. I love Jaws.
David Macy says his wife still won't go and see. Just going to have to build her a swimming pool, mate. No other choice. So anyone else who wants to put a number 5 pick in, there's 11 people watching, but not all of you are taking part. You can take part. Just to recap again, we had J Penn had It. We've got one for The Omen. We've got one for Evil Dead 2. We've got one for Salem's Lot. And so I think that was all from the chat. So there are 10 people watching at least. If you want to vote for number 5, put your vote in now. And then we also have our...
This is something that I think only Lance would genuinely remember. And that is that when this film was released, the kind of hysteria about going into the water.
Oh, God, yeah.
It was bizarre.
The beaches of England, which are not well known for their shark incidents, the opening weekend of this film were deserted, and all the beaches around the UK, all the people were absolutely, the business owners were infuriated because no one was booking their camping holiday in, Inglemells or wherever.
It's often called the first summer blockbuster, and yet probably hurt summer economies for a lot of beachfront places.
Yeah. I mean, I was living abroad. I was living in South Africa when this was first released. So I remember seeing it at this huge cinema in downtown Pretoria called the Oscar, and there was only 4 people in it: myself, my sister, and 2 friends. And we were watching this movie, and it absolutely blew me away. But there was this hysteria. I mean, even among us, I think it was something that was quite catching, really. As soon as you hear about something that, people don't want to go in the sea, people don't want to go into rivers and all that kind of stuff, it does sort of rub off. But the beaches of South Africa, I mean, Durban, Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, everywhere were absolutely deserted. Nobody would go near the beaches, and that's got a big coastline.
Well, I mean, I saw this film for the first time probably in 1988 or 89 when I was young, and I didn't want to go in a swimming pool. It scared the crap out of me.
No, the kids were the same over here, man.
Yeah,
it was
it's exactly the same.
Because I was just getting ready to learn to swim, and I had seen Jaws, and I was just like,
And then for some reason, people were saying that Jaws 2, the log line, which was not the log line for it, was just when you thought it was safe to go back to the toilet. So everybody started checking behind when they would go to the loo, and I don't know where that came from, but it was. I'm not joking. People were. There was a really weird psychology behind the whole poster that shark was going to come up and bite you in the arse no matter where you were.
But I think it's really kind of a fear of the unknown, isn't it? This is essentially what it's all about. It's what's beneath the surface. We don't know what lies beneath, what's underneath that. That calm or that calm surface, that it's the unknown, the fear of the unknown. But it's it's a fantastic film. Great choice.
We better move on because we've got quite a few to get through yet. And normally I like to talk about casts and stuff, but I think we'll just do that with our number 1 pick today. So, okay, we're on to number 4. So, people in chat, you can now pick your number 4 choices. Please precede it with the number 4 in front. So, you know, a good example of it would be like this one, where Melvin Deepley's put 5. So it's a bit like Sesame Street. What you're going to do is put 4 in front of that now. So, Wayne, what is your number 4 pick?
My pick for number 4 is a little seen movie, I think, called Lady in White from 1988.
I've seen it.
Right? Yeah.
Which was this really brilliant film by a director called Frank LaLoggia, who hasn't directed a whole lot. He directed a film back in 81 called Fear No Evil, which was kind of a high school horror movie where some teenager thinks he's the devil, that kind of thing, and had the Boomtown Rats on the soundtrack. So, but a few years went by and he made this movie, and it's a wonderful kind of small town set in the 60s, you know, idyllic Norman Rockwell kind of thing. And there's some horrible goings on. There's kids are going missing, and it kind of balances this dark, serious, socially aware thriller plotline with this fantastical ghost story, which is very kind of sweet in many ways. You know, it's you know, the ghost of this child saves the life of this troubled kid, you know, who comes from a family who are, you know, are going through some dark times, let's just say. I won't spoil the plot because it's a great mystery thriller as well. But I love the way that Frank LaLoggia really sets the tone of this. You know, I think it's upstate New York, so it's a brilliant Halloween setting. I think it's one of the best Halloween movies in terms of just the way it kind of recreates the season. And, you know, it's beautifully photographed by Russell Carpenter, who went on to work with James Cameron. So some good pedigree there. And Alex Rocco is brilliant in it as the father, Len Carew as the uncle, Lucas Haas as the kid in question. So the kid witnesses, he's locked in, he's a bullied kid, and he's locked in overnight in a school. And, you know, he witnesses the apparition of a murder that took place. And he kind of investigates it on his own terms. And, you know, he gets involved in the killings. You know, he becomes kind of a target for the killer himself. But it's just, I can't give anything away because the mystery is so much a part of it. But it's very much a vibe. And I think it's like a PG-13 movie as well. So it's like, it's not a gory film. It's very much an old-fashioned ghost story, but with some very serious social, political stuff in the background. You know, because it's set in the 60s, it's set in a small town. So there's elements of racism going on, and there's a kind of a subplot where, you know, where a black man is implicated in the murders, but it's to do with the town's small-mindedness and, you know, the sense of racism that's going on. So there's some great deep social themes happening behind this lovely ghost story. And I just think it's such an underrated film, and such a shame that Frank LaLoggia I don't think he made a theatrical film since this. It was a huge box office bomb, but has kind of developed a cult following over time, I think. It's just wonderful. It's a great underrated piece of work, and I saw it at the right time. I saw it when I was about 5 or 6. It was on Channel 4 one night, and it was on after something else I was recording. So I got the first like hour and 10 minutes of it after whatever it was I was recording. So I watched it, and then it cut off at a really crucial point. So I had to go and track down the VHS, rent that out, and figure out what happens then afterwards. And it has stuck with me since. You know, again, as I say, some of the acting can be a little bit hokey in it. I mean, it's probably a little bit too saccharine as well. You know, when it turns the sweetness and charm on. But I think everything just works because it has this contrast of dark, serious themes and plot, but with a real sense of innocence that has to do with the time and the setting. So I highly recommend it if you can find it.
I'm going to dip in and tell you mute yourself. I saw this film in the cinema. It had a 1 week, very limited release in London when it came out, and I saw it on the strength of thinking I actually thought it was a sequel to The Woman in Black, and I'd seen the original version of that, which still the original film version of that, not the Daniel Radcliffe one, the one shot before that actually still holds up really well. I think it's a very good movie. I wasn't interested in seeing the new version. This photo here, this was the one time in the cinema where I proper jumped when this woman, and she kind of floated into the scene, if I remember rightly. I do remember coming out of the film being disappointed in it. I think because I was expecting it to be more along the lines of The Woman in Black, and it wasn't. It was tonally very different. So this is definitely a film that I want to revisit as an adult, and I have a feeling that I'm a big fan of Alex Rocco, actually, sadly passed away recently. And Lucas Haas is a very good actor as well. So, yeah, I'm going to revisit this. Thanks, Wayne, for sort of making me remember it again. And I think it's probably worth people checking out, because as a kid, you're looking for particular things in a movie. As an adult, I think what you're looking for is very different. That shot alone has got to be worth watching the film for, surely. So, okay, so that's Wayne's choice is Woman in White. I like the fact that you always come out with unique choices, Wayne, because I would not have picked that one to have on people's lists. Inside Man, what you got for your number 4?
I'm going to go for one. This is going to be slightly controversial where it's placed. I'm going to go for An American Werewolf in London.
Oh, good choice. Good choice.
It's one of my all-time favorite films. I think, considering that John Landis wrote the screenplay for this at 18 years old, whilst he was working on Kelly's Heroes, I think it's for a young man to have penned something so influential, and I just think it's an amazing film. Everything about it. I mean, obviously, you can't talk about American Werewolf without talking about Rick Baker's astounding effects.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they are. Everybody says they're groundbreaking, and they are groundbreaking. I believe he was originally down to do The Howling.
Yeah.
And John
Wasn't that
Landis.
Tobe Hooper? Tobe Hooper did The Howling, didn't he? Was it not Tobe Hooper?
Joe Dante.
Joe Dante.
Thank
you. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was. So Rick Baker was going to be doing the effects for The Howling, and of course, John Landis was a little bit peeved, but he knew Rob Bottin, so Rick Baker asked Rob Bottin to do the effects for The Howling, and he went on to do American Werewolf in London. So obviously all shot over here, Twickenham Studios, in and around London, the West Country. It's a superb film. It's very difficult to say things that haven't, try and say something that hasn't already been said about this movie. I just think it's a real piece of work.
That's another one that was, hey, we've got the video of American Werewolf in London. Do you want to come and see it? And of the 4 films that I saw that way that come under horror, that's also how I first saw Alien, by the way. Yeah, well, but I was a kid and it was on video, and it was like video was very new and couldn't go and see 18s at the cinema. But yeah, that was, and I remember when I was watching it, I wasn't that into horror movies at that age, and I thought, do I really want to see a werewolf film? And I was kind of expecting to see a man in a werewolf costume. Boy, was I wrong. And then also you've got that wonderful kind of nightmare scene where the SS Stormtrooper evil guy.
The SS zombies, the Nazi
zombies. SS zombies with the Mac-10 machine guns and just like massacre the family. I mean, that's a nuts, batshit crazy scene, but it works.
And the Griffin Dunn stuff, the Griffin Dunn makeups as well. The way he's constantly decomposing as time goes on.
Griffin
Dunn,
yeah. Oh, hang on. Well, we want to be on top. Number 4 pick. There we go. Sorry, jumping around a bit there. He was in After Hours, that weird Martin Scorsese film that I need to do a stream about at some point. Yeah, good choice. Well, let's keep it moving. So, Gourd King, what's your number 4 pick?
For my number 4, we're going to 1988, and this is actually the very first movie I ever saw at a theater, and that is Beetlejuice.
Okay.
I Absolutely love Beetlejuice. I think it's hilarious. It's probably even better now for me than when I watched as a kid. And as a kid, it was just pure magic for me because like my sister and I, who's a couple of years older than me, I don't know why we did this, but we used to pretend that we were like on set and we helped them construct all this because we just thought that would be really cool to have been a part of, and it's probably the first movie that got me, interested in kind of the behind the scenes elements of how a movie is made because I was just like, gosh, how did they do that? How did they do that? There's all these, it's like a horror carnival, in movie form. You've got really excellent performances by Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis, and then of course Michael Keaton, who it's funny because they almost treat him like they did Jaws, where you don't really see him all that often in the movie until the very end.
Yeah,
they kind of hold him back to where he's almost just a supporting character, but he's just phenomenal in that part.
I showed a scene of that at my annual movie quiz. It's a scene that I've shown 3 times over the last 27 years that I've been running this movie quiz every year. And it's the scene where they go into the waiting room in hell and you've got the guy who's been flattened like a pancake on the conveyor belt that goes through to the different sections. And then there's all the people in the waiting room and you've got the guy he's had his head shrunk. And his head's all dead tiny. And one of the movie quiz questions I always asked the teams was name all the different ways people have died in the waiting room.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure I could name quite a few of them.
Yeah, they both had to write them out this year, and one team got all of them correct, and the other team got all of them except for one. It's like shark attack, and probably because they've just come off of zombie flesh eaters, off the set. I mean, David Macy has said I never even considered Beetlejuice. It was on my short list of 30, but I felt essentially for me, it's 60% comedy, probably even 70%, 30% horror.
It's very comedy centric, but it leans so heavily on like horror imagery and things like that. It still has the scary elements because the whole point of the movie is that they're trying to scare this family out. So I'm like, okay, I think it was 50-50. Like that's the 50-50 one for me.
Right.
Where it hit both genres just right. But yeah, and plus because it's the first movie I saw in theaters, I have a major, major soft spot for it.
Sure.
It was originally in my top 5, but I thought had I picked it, Lance would have kicked me out for picking a comedy. So
no, I wouldn't have. You could have had Gremlins in there, or Gremlins 2, which I think came out in 1990.
I consider Gremlins 2 also. I love that movie.
Gremlins was a great horror film until they told the story about the Santa Claus father getting trapped down the chimney, and then it just became a really bad comedy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good film, but ultimately, again, I felt it straddled too many
Gremlins 2 is a little bit too. It was a little too meta for me to really consider it. I thought about it, but I was like, it's a little meta. But yeah, Beetlejuice to me, it hit that 50-50 mark.
Great choice. Good choice. Okay, so I think that's my number 4 then. Let me get my list up because I've moved them around so many times. Oh yeah, okay, cool. My number 4, definitely got to put a still up for this. Sorry, and I didn't put stills up for Beetlejuice, but I think we all know what it looks like. This film has been remade. I personally have not watched the remake quite deliberately. It definitely straddles more than one genre. It's a road movie. Can anyone guess what it is? Well, my number 4 pick.
Oh, is it The
Hitcher?
Is it The Hitcher?
It is.
What a movie!
Now, the first time I became aware of this film was, as Inside Man will remember, if you used to walk up Wardour Street in London, you had 4 film offices in a row. And walking along that street was great because in the 80s, that whole street was just filled with the posters of not what's out now, what's coming up soon. And as soon as they had a poster and a press pack of stills, they would put the poster up and they'd put the stills all around the poster. And I was up there with my girlfriend at the time, and we we always would go and walk past and look at the things, and some of them looked a lot better than they were. Like Firewalker with Chuck Norris looked really good and turned out not to be so great. But I mean, I kind of liked it. It's on the shelf behind me. But The Hitcher, this is one of the stills they had in the window, and I was already a massive fan of Rutger Hauer from Lady Hawk. And Melvin, you can't pick Mad Max 2 because that exists in the future, not in a present Earth timeline. So, yeah,
well, he looks like a Mad Max 2 character right here.
He does, actually. Never has a shotgun been used with such great affection in a movie. There's so many things that are so great about this film. The three leads, particularly C. Thomas Howell, he's never bettered this movie.
No, never.
And he is a good actor. He's not a one-known actor. Jennifer Jason Leigh and Rutger Hauer are all amazing in the film. There's just so many great moments, like the bit where they're on the verge of surrendering and it's all going to go good.
Yeah.
And then Rutger Hauer appears right next to the policeman in his truck and shoots them both through the head. I remember the whole cinema going, "Oh my God, no!" And there's also that wonderful kind of, this guy is kind of the devil vibe going on, and it's because it's got that vibe that I think it does have one foot firmly in the horror camp. It's also,
I think when you look at that particular scene where he's actually hitched a ride with the family and the car goes,
oh my God, with the teddy bear out the window.
Yeah, it just freaks you out. I mean, you can see the panic on C. Thomas Howell's face, but it's like, oh my God, no. Yeah, it's an awful moment.
Jump in, Wayne.
It has a really great surreal tone to it, and I think that comes down to the great score by Mark Isham.
Yeah,
really cool ambient kind of tones that kind of adds to what you're saying, that he's this kind of devil character that just he's everywhere and nowhere. You know, he's indefinable almost, and that's what kind of, I think it's the score helps bring it to that kind of horror level almost, where it's just this kind of surreal ambient atmosphere. It's very hard to put a finger on, but it's a film that seems to be rooted in reality, but it's not in many ways. And I think it's Mark Isham's music that really
Mark Isham's a fantastic composer.
Yeah. People in chat, if you're going to put a choice in, please, as Sir Clueless has just done, please proceed it with the number 3, otherwise it won't be counted towards the final score. There's 9 people watching now. So I know some of the regulars are still here. Do chip in with your pick. So chip in with your pick. What is your number 3 choice? Sorry, we're on we on 4 or are we on 3? We're on 4, right? So that was my number.
You were the last 4.
I was the last one for 4. Sorry, yeah. I think we've got everybody for 4. So do what Sir Clueless is. We're about to start the number 3 picks in a second. This is Armin Shimmerman, who plays Quark in Deep Space Nine. And I never realized he was in The Hitcher because I've never seen him without his big ears on. So I don't know what he looks like outside of Deep Space Nine, I have to admit. I think I have seen him, but he was a lot older. So, yeah, I mean, they blow up a whole gas station in the movie at one point. So it's a film that succeeds on a number of different levels. It's great. It's a great horror. It's a great action film. It's a great suspense film. You're really rooting for C. Thomas Howell in the movie because he could be you. That I think is why the film works so well. He's so good.
I do have to give a shout out to a straight-to-video action thriller, which is pretty much a blatant rip-off / remake of this that came out in about 93, 94 called Road Flower. Christopher Lambert and Craig Sheffer. Directed by Darren Sarafian. It's not quite, it doesn't have the kind of, the ethereal kind of thing going on, but in every other respect, it's a direct lift, and it's a very, very good early Miramax film as well. It was just before Miramax became kind of the big art house kind of company, but well worth checking out. Just a very good kind of desert road movie.
That's
pursuit.
I'll definitely check. I'll definitely check that out. Thanks very much. Okay, so we're going into the number 3 picks now then. I'm not going to say any more about The Hitcher, even though there's a ton more I could say about it. It's a great film. If you've never seen it, put it in. Is Jurassic Park considered a horror or a thriller? Well, now, if you saw that as a kid, that could be your Jaws. So I would accept that as a choice. If you saw it as a kid and it scared you, then for you, that technically was a horror film at the time. Because I think an adult, still, mind you, an adult who saw Jaws at the time definitely had the crap scared out of them. Anyone want to offer some thoughts on that before we move on?
Well, honestly, the first thing I thought was, well, if Jaws is one of your picks, then you could justify Jurassic Park the exact same way. So, yeah. So I think the exact same thing.
It's allowed. So if you want to pick it, absolutely knock yourself out. Wayne, we're back to you. What's your number 3 pick?
Okay, for number 3, I'm going for Psycho 2.
Good movie.
And I'm going to be a little bit controversial here and say that I prefer Psycho 2 to Psycho 1. And
Psycho 2 is a good film.
It's a terrific film, and it's as close as you could get to Hitchcock without being Hitchcock, I think, or Brian De Palma being Hitchcock. I mean, Richard Franklin was very much a Hitchcock scholar, but he manages to strike a tone that is perfectly fitting within the first film. It's very Hitchcockian in many ways, and Dean Cundey, who is one of my favorite cinematographers, his work on this film is just incredible. The story, it's just creepy. Again, I saw it at the right time. I saw it at an unsuspecting age. I think it was actually the first Psycho film I had seen. So I kind of worked my way backwards from there. And, I think I was about 7 or 8 when I saw it. I taped it one night, not knowing what the hell Psycho, the series, was. And I watched it, and I was just so creeped out. Not by Norman Bates, the character, or anything like that, because there's when you're watching the film for the first time, you think there's kind of a supernatural element going on in it, because everything just doesn't make sense. Of course, everything is revealed in the end, the whole mystery that's going on. But there's a creepiness to Psycho 2 that I think is missing from the first film. I mean, the first film I always consider to be a masterful thriller. I very rarely look at it as a horror film because it doesn't have those kind of generic registers that horror, as we know it, tends to have.
I think the limits of the Hays Code have imposed. I mean, that obviously dictated everything.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think Richard Franklin just amped up everything. I always imagined that Psycho 2 is the kind of film that Hitchcock would have made had he lived to work in the 80s. Where he could bring those excesses that he was always hinting at throughout his career. And we saw a bit of it with Frenzy, but I think at that stage, he had a bit more leeway in terms of what he could depict on screen and talk about, or, thematically. But I think Richard Franklin does an honourable job of doing what Hitchcock probably would have done. But I just think it's a brilliant script by Tom Holland, who became, a very good director himself. Perkins is absolutely fantastic in it, and he manages to strike a chord of innocence, which is always a hard thing for that character, because there's something going on there. He's never going to be thoroughly innocent, but you do feel sorry for him because you have Meg Tilly and her scheming mother and everything that's going on there, and you do end up rooting for Norman Bates, which is a strange thing to be doing. Again, look at that shot there by Dean Cundey, the canted angles, which just makes everything that little bit more unnerving. So he's doing the best Hitchcock he can do and just amplifying it that little bit more. And I just think it's a terrific film. And as a sequel, I mean, God, it's a sequel to one of the greatest American films of all time. And for me, it manages to just go that little bit better for me. I know very few people are going to agree with me, but that's how I feel.
Oh, I know. Actually, we're at the cinema, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, I was watching a video they were interviewing Quentin Tarantino, and he actually had very similar sentiments. I don't know if he said flat out that he preferred Psycho 2, but I know he's not a huge Alfred Hitchcock fan. I think he feels that the era that he directed in kind of held him back in a lot of ways, but he had a lot of praise for Perkins' performances, said it was one of his favorite horror movie performances.
Yeah, I can see what he means there in terms of the Hitchcock team, because he always hinted at pushing the envelope with his work, and obviously censorship of its time, just he couldn't go there. So I think between Psycho 2 and some of De Palma's films like Body Double and Dress to Kill, I think that's the closest we could get to a Hitchcock kind of movie in the 80s, where you have all his kind of visual style, his themes, etc., but where these guys are really kind of pushing the envelope in terms of violence and depictions of kind of aberrant sexuality or whatever. So yeah, I think it's definitely up there. I agree with Tarantino on that one, at least.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Fantastic. Well, that's another unusual choice. Look at that shot. How great is that? And I went past that set, which I believe is still there. I think the Hitchcock, the Psycho house is still on the backlot. It certainly was when I did that tour and we went past it. And it's so weird because built right in front of it are all the houses from Desperate Housewives. They're on the same street, and you go past those houses, and then suddenly this one, like, it's on the hill on this rampart thing, and it suddenly looms into view. It's quite surreal when you see it. That's a great shot as well, seeing the doorknob, which is very Hitchcockian actually, that kind of angle. But yeah, good choice. Inside Man, what you got for your number 3?
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, I wondered if
choice.
someone was going to have that on their list. Possibly the most annoying character in a wheelchair ever in a movie.
Yeah, and apparently he was like that offset as well. He stayed in character pretty much all the way through the shoot.
Well, was he?
Yeah,
that's who he was. Maybe, I don't know.
no, he kind of made a point of making people dislike him.
Right.
Just for the duration of the shoot. But I just think it's an incredibly well crafted piece of art. I think it's incredibly well shot. I mean, the cinematography is fantastic. Some really innovative shots.
Up until that.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, go on. You go.
I was going to say it absolutely. I mean, when I first saw it as a kid, I soiled myself. It just absolutely freaked me out.
I was going to say this is the shot that, because I didn't see it. That was another one that was on the Video Nasties list, and it was one that nobody seemed to have at our school. So I saw it when it was re-released, which probably would have been mid 90s or something. When it finally got, I think I saw it on DVD actually, and I'd never seen it. And then this is the first person to get killed, I think, or first or second. And, suddenly because there's a big build up to this moment. Suddenly the guy comes out that door, grabs her, she's screaming, and just puts her on that meat hook. It's like, hang on, that was so quick. What did that really happen?
Yeah.
That
was an amazing effect. And, I mean, obviously it was a harness, and I think they had like a sort of a metal tube or something sort of connected to the harness, and just literally just put her on the metal tube. But apparently the house they were filming there, and they weren't told that out back was this huge cannabis farm, and of course they let's just say they made use of the facilities. Made very good use of the facilities, but there's a very, very good book, pretty much the what I would consider to be the definitive making of this movie, called Chainsaw Confidential by Gunnar Hansen, who was Leatherface. It's a brilliant book. It's brilliantly written. The recollections of his time on this movie are just mind-blowing. From the moment he gets the part, which was kind of by pure accident, all the way through the shoot and the release and the subsequent success of the movie.
Is it really good insight. The guy on the left look like Adam Driver in the middle?
He does a little bit.
This geezer sitting here. Yeah.
But it's
and the guy just below him looks like Amy Schumer a little.
Amy Schumer.
But it's such a raw, primitive piece of art.
Yeah.
It's just it's indescribable, and it's again, it's one of those films where you look at the franchise and where it went completely in mad directions, not where you think they'd go. I mean, Texas Chainsaw 2, I love. And the fact that Tobe Hooper did it as well and took it in a completely different direction was brilliant. 3 tried to go back to this, but couldn't, because it's so one of a kind. You could never do it with, even though it was part 3 was a low budget New Line Cinema movie, it still wasn't low budget enough to get this kind of feel of the first movie. It's a true piece of independent art, and so raw and so unique that it can never be replicated in remake or sequel form.
No, I think this is kind of the blueprint for horror, really, for me. This is the horror blueprint, and I think after seeing it, you kind of feel kind of slightly dirty after seeing it.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's despite the fact that there's very little violence that you see that's in any way gruesome. There's very little actual blood in the movie. Pretty much all the violence is very much just implied.
Yeah, I think the most blood is where you see the guy, cutting his hand and wiping it across the side of the van. And that's pretty much the most amount of blood I think that you see.
Yeah, the violence in it is very fast. It's like a quick snapshot of something, and it's more the implication, I think. That's the poster from the UK, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
That's the UK cinema quad. Good choice, Inside Man. Gourd King, what you got for me?
All right. This one, actually, you and I talked a little bit about on one of my gaming streams about a week or so ago, is 1987's Near Dark by director Catherine Bigelow.
I gave that an honourable mention earlier. Yeah,
it's my favorite vampire movie of all time. It has such a spectacular cast, Lance Henriksen, Bill Paxton, Jeanette Goldstein, you have Adrian Pasdar playing the main role, and I think it's Jenny Wright is playing his love interest. I think it does an excellent job setting up its premise. I think the scene where he's actually just where he's transforming basically is probably the only scene that actually genuinely scared me, and because it's a very disturbing scene. He's just walking home and he's just getting kind of progressively more sick. And then they lined his jacket with all these cigars and they start smoking. And he's just, you got to putting yourself in this guy's shoes. It's just like, oh my gosh, the sun's coming up and this guy's just cooking. And it's just like, just that to me is just terrifying. It's like, it's like, there's no escape from it. And then they roll up in that RV and take him away, and then they play off of the pretty famous trope of having a vampire who's reluctant to make his first kill.
Yeah,
and they play to that, I think, exceptionally well. And all the while, the movie has this amazing score by Tangerine Dream, which to this day is one of my favorite musical scores of all time.
Yeah.
This is the scene I always remember from the film.
Yeah, that one got to me because I first saw this movie as a kid, and Homer's playing, he's more or less a man in a kid's body, but obviously if you act like a kid, and you're feeling your first little bit of real, like, visceral sympathy for him, because it's like at first, like, you're sympathetic to him, I think, when you're older and you realize what he's trapped inside, but watching this kid burn up that way, it's like, oh gosh, that's awful. But then the bar scene is, of course, the most famous scene, though.
I was working at the cinema when the movie came out, so I got to see it more times than anybody probably should have done. But my other favorite scene is Bill Paxton walking along the top of the bar with his spurs on his boot.
Yeah. Well, like I highly recommend the making of documentary that they did for that movie. It's this scene in particular. Bill Paxton apparently had a really bad fever before they filmed this, and they gave him like a shot of B12, and he just, all that wildness is just it's his energy,
right?
He's just he's just playing to it just perfectly. And then and probably my favorite line in the movie is they've already killed the waitress, and the bartender's just like, okay, what do you people want? Lance Henderson's he says, just a few more minutes of your time, about the same duration as the rest of your life. And it's like, yep, you're all screwed. It's such a great scene. It's such a great scene.
Yeah.
And I don't know who else ever caught this, who's seen it, but the guy who first that basically Severin, Bill Paxton's character, picks a fight with on his behalf, Adrian Pasdars, is he's the guy from Terminator 2 who gets tossed onto the stove by Arnold at the beginning. It's the same guy.
Oh, so he literally did borrow, or Catherine borrowed a lot of Cameron's contacts there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that would have been Cameron borrowing him from her, because Terminator 2 came after Near Dark.
Tim Thomason is one of my favorite B-movie actors of all time. He's got a little part in Near Dark. There he is. I'm trying to get him. He's about 80 now. I'm trying to get him on the channel for an interview.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I love him. He's been in so many great films.
He's a good friend of Nick McLean's.
Oh, you've got to get him. Got to get him for me, Wayne. I've been trying to get him for ages. Right. Okay. I've got to talk to Nick about that for sure. I've got to get him on. He's no idea how big a fan of his I am. I'm just a huge fan. He was like my first. You got introduced to a whole load of different actors because of video.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the first one because of video that I who is this guy? I haven't seen this guy before. And Uncommon Valor was the first film I saw him in, which I did see on video. I was too young to see it at the cinema. But yeah, Near Dark is a great film, great aesthetic, really well shot. It was made for a minuscule sum of money and launched Kathleen Bigelow's career, which, as we know, went on to great things.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the guy you mean?
Yep, that's the guy right there.
Yeah, that's what I thought you meant.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and he played Jack Death in Trancers. Absolutely, I'm well aware of that. He's in a little scene film called Volunteers with Tom Hanks and John Candy. That's a very good movie. Almost no one's watched. Great choice. So we'll move on because push for time. Bloody hell, we're coming up to the 2 hour mark, and we're only just coming up to number 2, so we better pick up the pace a bit. So my number 3 pick, which I'll not dwell on due to time. Oh fuck, it's one of my favorites though. Is John Carpenter's The Fog. Now this was one of the first movies I saw as a horror film actually on TV in color, because I remember I was allowed to stay up and watch it. I was actually looking forward to the remake because I know that this film's got a really interesting history. When Carpenter first delivered it, they said that it wasn't gory enough, and they wanted more gore because by then sort of people were expecting to see that kind of thing. So Rob Bottin, who again did effects work on various films at this time, when you see the extra shots of things like the lepers' faces and stuff like that with maggots in them and stuff, all of that stuff was added later by a second unit. But even without any of that, I just really love the story. I like the whole storyline about this town that's kind of got an evil past that it doesn't really know about. And that evil past is that they deliberately shipwrecked a load of lepers that were going to settle up the coast from them, and they didn't want a leper colony up the coast from them. I love the way the movie starts. It starts with all these weird things happening just before midnight all around the town, which sets up a great tone. It's got a really good score. I've got the soundtrack on vinyl. No surprise there. Adriana Barbaro is the voice of the radio host of the town. She's great. Very young Jamie Lee Curtis in one of her first roles after Halloween. And I like the fact that they show the bad guys in it so sparingly. You almost never see them until right up till the end. You don't really. That's a great sort of like shot of one of them just appearing on the side there, and they've come back to seek their revenge on the relatives of the people who wronged them in the first place. This kid's a bit annoying, but I just love the way the film is shot. The siege in the church at the end with the hands coming through the stained glass windows, stuff like that. I just think it's a really great film, and for me, it's very much what a good horror film should be. Should have a good story, good suspense, good characters that you care about, that you don't want to see get killed, you know, and then also something that really scares the shit out of you. And when the fog starts coming through the town and you got that music, dum dum dum, and they're telling people where to go for safety, it really ratchets everything up. And these shots when they finally come into the church at the end, really, really, really well done. And apparently that's half the camera team made up, I think, in one of those. But yeah, so the fog's my number 3. I think we better press on quickly. So let's go to number 2, guys in the chat. Those of you that are still with us, we're going on to number 2. So I'll just change the banner accordingly. So Wayne, what is your number 2 pick?
My number 2 is one of my favorite movies of all time, Halloween 3: Season of the Witch.
I was hoping you were going to mention this one.
It's my favorite Halloween movie, and I was, as you know, Lance, I'm in the middle of writing a book on the Halloween franchise. So I've been talking to the people who've made it. I was talking to the director, Tommy Lee Wallace, recently, and I was telling him, you know, that the whole reason why I agreed to do a Halloween book in the first place was because of Halloween 3. So that's quite unusual for him to hear that, you know, somebody's love of the Halloween franchise comes from Halloween 3. But it's true. My love of Halloween 3 goes back to when I was, you know, again, my dad and his influence on kind of introduced me to movies and, you know, sharing his love of movies. I remember I was coming home from school one day. I was like in, you know, senior infants or first class, whatever it was called. I was basically 5 or 6. And he used to tape these random movies off the TV at night. And he would tell me about them. So I remember he picked me up one day from school and he says, I recorded a movie last night off the TV for you. It was called Halloween 3 or something like that. And I was like, really? What's that, Dad? So I went home and I put the tape on and it was Halloween 3. And straight away I was struck by this, the music, the visuals, the whole Irish thing. You know, Dan O'Hurley was in it. That's who I kind of recognized from whatever movies my dad would watch him in, you know. But I was just struck by the tone of the film. And it is so unusual. And I mean, as I've gotten older and you watch the film, you become more aware of horror cinema and the history of horror cinema. And then you're aware of the fact that it's a Nigel Neal story. And that it's very influenced by Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I mean, there's obvious allusions in there to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, such as the Santa Mira name setting. And it's just a very idiosyncratic piece of work. I mean, it's very Carpenter-esque in many ways, even though he didn't direct it. I mean, he does the score with Alan Howard, so it's straight away it has that tone and feel of a Carpenter film. Dean Cundy, who did the first 2, who was the cinematographer on the first 2 Halloween movies, shoots this one. Now, very different in style. Like, it's a very bright film. It's a colorful film. A lot of it is at daytime, and there's a lot of real, you know, kind of warm Halloween primary colors going on. So, to me, it's a film I can't kind of objectively quantify. It's one of those films where I just love it innately. It's just a personal thing. If I was to review it objectively, I don't even know if I could give it 5 stars, because how do you say that this is a masterpiece? It's not an objective masterpiece, but it's just something I absolutely love. And I'm so happy that I'm writing about it and talking to the people who made it at the moment. I mean, to me, this is why I do these books, is because you get to kind of celebrate these films which are just so personal to you, and which you know, I feel deserve a kind of a better critical representation. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. And it will always be one of my favorite films. It's something I can put on at least once a month. I will never get bored of it. You know,
you're not alone, because it's Retro Nerd Girl's favorite Halloween movie too. It's also the first Halloween movie that I saw, because 1 and 2 had kind of already been and gone. This is the first film I ever watched on a Betamax tape, and a friend of mine had a Betamax video recorder, which his parents soon realized was the wrong format to purchase. But one of the films that they had an actual original copy of, it was an original tape, was Halloween 3. And So it was the first Halloween movie that I saw. And when I saw the other two, I really liked it because the plot was different. And I liked the fact that it didn't have Michael Myers in it. And it had this really interesting story about this person bringing this biblical, horrible kind of thing to pass. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it. Also,
I believe that the title, the Halloween title, was only kind of plastered on it as a sort of a money grab, a marketing tool, because wasn't it original. I think Wayne would probably bear me out on this one. That was just originally called Season of the Witch.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think it would have made more of an impact if they had just left it Season of the Witch, because the whole point was Carpenter's original plan was for every Halloween movie to be kind of an anthology thing this. But because part one was so successful, they went straight into the Michael Myers thing with part two. But he said, okay, after that, we're doing my original plan, which was to do the anthology. So this was the kind of the first breakaway of what was supposed to be many, breakaways from the Halloween or from the Michael Myers situation. But it tanked spectacularly, both with critics and at the box office. So, of course, the producers and the rights holders wanted to go back to Michael Myers. But I think, had it not had the Halloween front title, I think audiences in general probably would have approached it differently and not.
I think you're right.
With expectations of, Michael Myers or whatever it is that they were hoping to get. I mean, if you look at the trailer is fantastic. The teaser, it's creepy. It doesn't give anything away in terms of the actual story, but it just sets up this kind of really weird, unusual kind of Halloween experience. But it's great that now I think people are kind of coming around to it, that it has gotten this kind of critical reappraisal over the last, I'd say, between 5 and 10 years, with the re-releases, the proper re-releases on Blu-ray and DVD, because for a long time you could only get this really terrible, muddy VHS. It wasn't even though it was distributed by Universal, the VHS releases and the early DVD releases were by a cheap enough company. I think it was MIA. So the transfers were always terrible. And I mean, they were 4:3 as well. And when Dean Cundy shoots a film, you want to see it in this glorious widescreen print, this framing, So finally, people are able to see what the film was supposed to be, what it looked like, and it was heavily edited as well. When it first came out on VHS in the 80s, it was distributed by Warner Brothers, and that was heavily truncated. I mean,
they deliberately wanted a 15 certificate for the video release.
That's right, and some of the gorier scenes were taken out, so it was quite tame, And I mean, it's still not a gruesome movie by any means, but it was very tame. It made
a lot more sense with the gore in.
Yes, absolutely.
The scene with the family in the room made no sense until you saw the full version of it and you understood what had happened.
Exactly, and especially those early scenes in the hospital as well, with the eye gouging and the guy setting himself on fire and all that. So there was a lot of stuff happening that we didn't get to see in the early versions that only makes sense, years later. But I think it's just a terrific film. Tonally, it's so unique. It's so brilliant. And I think Tommy Lee Wallace is such an underrated filmmaker as well. He made one of my favorite sequels of the 80s horror sequels, which Fright Night 2, which I think is better than the first Fright Night, but we'll reserve
dangerous words.
I'm just going to mute myself now.
Yes. All right. Well, look, let's move on. But I agree. I think this is a fantastic movie and very, very underrated. And I recommend people do reappraise it and check it out if you haven't seen it already. And this review makes me want to rewatch it now. So Inside Man, what you got for number 2? We're going to have to race through these because we're running over time now.
The Wicker Man.
I knew that would be on somebody's list somewhere. Had to be, didn't it? Yeah. Very creepy film, very disturbing.
Yeah, very, very disturbing. Yeah, again, another one that I saw when I was quite young, I'd say, and it just sort of stuck with me, that whole sort of folk horror. Yeah, an incredibly disturbing film. But it's also it's not so much a whodunit, it's more a why done it kind of story as well. That sort of search for the answers. But Edward Woodward, the fantastic portrayal of Sergeant Howie, and you can't fault Christopher Lee, or indeed Ingrid Pitt in anything.
Yeah, it's it's a film. Oh, that scene was all kinds of strange. And I remember the first time I saw this film was on TV late one night. I think it had been on quite a few times. There's so many things in it that are disturbing, not least of which is the ending. Haven't seen the remake. Don't want to watch it.
Yeah, it's terrible. Went to the cinema to see that, and literally, I kid you not, I was sitting there with my other half. We were watching it. Within about 15, 20 minutes, people were getting up and walking out. But I'm one of those people that, if I pay my money to see a movie, I want to see it through to the end. And it's terrible. It's dreadful movie. But this is, I think this is a real piece of work. It's just a beautifully shot film. That final scene, literally the final shot, that absolute golden shot where the Wicker Man's burning, and and then we see the sunset.
I interviewed John Walsh, who's also like Wayne, is a kind of film biographer, and he's done a big coffee table book, The Making of the Wicker Man.
Yeah, I'd have to get a copy of that.
It's well worth. His books they're more about visuals, whereas Wayne's, I would say, his books are more about the text and reading the narrative and what makes this film good. Whereas John's books are more like those kind of making of books you used to get in the 80s. The Making of June, and and that they do have some interviews with people, but he had to interview relatives of people because pretty much everybody that worked on Wicker Man is dead.
Yeah. And of course, we all know the story about the missing footage and what's happened to that, and for decades and decades, Christopher Lee had said he thinks he knows where it is, but somebody still has this footage somewhere, because all the trims were taken away by people in these huge bins, but it was thanks to Roger Corman, who had an original print, the only surviving original print, which they struck other prints from. They used that as their kind of submaster. It's only thanks to Roger Corman archiving that years ago, decades ago, when they were trying to search for the original missing footage, or some of the missing footage, that he had the most complete version. So obviously he submitted that.
And that's why we got the later cut of better quality that we got on Blu-ray. We're going to have to rush on. Gourd King, what's your number 2?
Oh, I don't think you'll have ever heard of this one, but it's The Thing. The Thing is definitely my number 2.
No, I've never heard of it.
No, I've never heard of The Thing.
Yeah, a little indie film.
Somebody else in the chat has already picked The Thing as
Melvin
their number 2, which means The Thing currently is scoring 8 points on our score chart. In fact, somebody else mentioned it earlier, so it's got 10. So it's definitely in the lead, I would say, overall. What were the first circumstances under which you saw it? This was another one that I was invited around someone's house to watch a pirate video of.
Well, funny enough, the first time I watched it, I didn't watch it all the way through, but I guess like just the setting and the isolation of it kind of put me off to it the first time. And I didn't go back to it till I was about 13 or so. And then I finally sat down and watched the whole thing. And I just completely fell head over heels in love with it. Just the amazing way in which it builds tension throughout, and the incredible payoff of what the Thing is and what it's capable of doing, from the scene with the dogs to, the thing where they're trying to shock the guy back and the mouth of his stomach opens up. I mean, there's just, the gore effects are second to none. And yet it doesn't cheapen the overall tension. It heightens it because it's genuinely terrifying what you're watching. And, the underpinning of just this nice, subtle, excellent musical score has probably the best last line of a horror movie, in my opinion. Excellent performances. Kurt Russell, obviously, Keith David, Wilford Brimley. It's just beginning to end a phenomenal 10 out of 10 masterpiece.
I think it's one of the great ensemble casts of the time. It's very difficult to come close to that with an ensemble cast. This is one where virtually every aspect of great filmmaking comes together in this harmonious sort of mashup. It's just incredible. It blew me away,
Hmm.
absolutely blew me away, and it still blows me away today. You know, watching
Um,
this, as you say, the score, fantastic.
when I remember this guy Darren said, yeah, got this great film, come around, so, watch it. What's it called? And no one I hadn't heard of it. It's called The Thing, and I thought The Thing, that doesn't sound very good. I just a film that came out the same year was Who Dares Wins.
Mm.
That was kind of more of an enticing title. So I went around and watched it, and I sort of sat down, and it starts, dum dum dum, and it's all white and it's pretty gloom, and I'm like, I turned to him and I went, what the fuck's this about, mate? There's a dog skipping through the snow.
Mm.
It looks like it's going to be like Lassie or something. And he said, look, just watch it. Trust me, it's good. And I'm like, okay, all right. So I watched it. And then, a bit of gunplay, stuff going on. Why were they shooting at a dog? And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm getting drawn in here. And then when you get the first scene in the dog kennel with the spaghetti and,
Oh yeah.
the hands reaching, oh my God. And there was a comic shop that had, that scene is
Oh
just,
gosh.
yeah, with Norris, Charles Halloran, who, funnily enough, that actor actually did die of a heart attack, ironically. I think that was the original UK cinema poster, looked a lot like that. Man, I remember Man is the Warmest Place to Hide was the log line. That's a newer poster. That's an interesting poster from Japan, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But it's a great movie, which had a terrible prequel made where they gave the Thing abilities that it didn't have in the second film, which is what
I refuse to watch that movie.
it could have been good. It
could have been.
It adhered to the storyline of what was known
Exactly.
about that base and what had happened, and
That's what I was
combined
waiting
some
to hear. I
elements
was like,
of
is it going to adhere to it? Is it going to ruin it? The video game, by the way, that they just showed that picture is actually not too bad.
that I played that video game. That's a
Yeah,
good
it's
video
actually
game.
pretty good.
And this set was in the middle of nowhere in Canada, by the way. It was in a snow valley in Canada.
Yeah, in British Columbia, wasn't it? Yeah.
You had to drive a far old way to get there.
Yeah, I got to. I just got to quickly defend the prequel of The Thing. I think this is another example of where studio interference have completely ruined a movie. This potentially was a very, very good movie, a very good prequel. I mean, the kind of stuff that Associated Dynamics had done for this, they
replaced all the practical effects with CGI, and that was the studio that demanded that.
Yeah. They also kind of obliterated a lot of other bits and pieces out, sort of the spaceship and all that kind of stuff. But the artistry that actually went into recreating that, I think it's Tula station, the Norwegian station, was just amazing. I mean, they recreated those sets perfectly by eye, just by looking at, just by observing the original movie. When Kurt Russell goes through, everything down to the axe in the door, the height of the axe in the door, and so that was beautifully recreated. And it's such a shame when a studio takes over. This is where studios really annoy me, where the studio executives always think they know best, and they don't. They genuinely don't. And the reason they don't is because they don't give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a great example of a movie that was completely ruined by studio interference and people thinking, yeah, well, I want to contribute to this, so I'm going to make a decision on this and that. So we're going to turn it into our kind of movie. And they know nothing about movies. They know nothing about movies, and they don't care about movies. And that's one of the big reasons why this movie failed, and why it's so disappointing. And also, why the director, basically moved out of making features.
Yeah.
He's kind of taking himself away from making studio pictures now. So
studios they forget sometimes that the best thing they can do to contribute to a movie is stay away.
Yeah.
Can I ask, did anybody else mistakenly think that Fuchs in this film, who, by the way, in the original cut of the Carpenter movie, was killed by a spade through the stomach, and you can find the still of that online. He's actually pinned to a wall by a shovel, but they cut that scene but you can find a still of it online if you look hard enough. Did anyone else think the Fuchs was actually played by Richard Dreyfuss? Because he looks like him and he sounds like him. And when I watched the film for the first time, I was like, shit, there's the guy from Jaws. Actor called, I think it's Joe Polish.
Yeah, it's Joe Polish.
Yeah, and you can kind of see it there. But when he's in this movie, when he's younger, in fact, if you look at him in this shot on the right, how much of that is Richard Dreyfuss from Jaws right there?
A little bit, yeah.
Right.
If I think if his hair had been lighter, I probably could have very easily made that mistake.
Yeah, definitely.
I do have to just give a quick shout out to Christian Nyby and Howard Hawks' original version of The Thing from Outer Planet, which is very good in its own right, but obviously completely different to Carpenter's version. But very tense movie with James Arness as the monster. But Christian Nyby, who was kind of a bit of a journeyman kind of studio director, I think it's more of a Howard Hawks movie than actually Christian Nyby's. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth a visit, in terms of 50s, 60s kind of communist fearing, American sci-fi movies. It's up there with the best of them.
Yeah, I mean, all three of those movies actually exist side by side, sort of on my shelf. That's a great movie. That's a great movie.
Fantastic choice, and I concur with everything that's been said. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I've actually been lucky enough now to see it retrospectively in the cinema as well, and all the effects still hold up well today. There's nothing that I watch on it and I go, that doesn't look so good. And the same with the performances. Great ensemble from the cast. Quite a few regulars of Walter Hill's in this film as well. A couple of them. David Clennon is an actor that's gone on to do great stuff that I've really liked. And he's another one who's got a double because he looks like Howling Mad Murdoch from the A-Team. Especially in
he
this
does.
film.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, he does.
So he's another one who's, Richard Mazur is another fantastic actor that has just done so many great performances, most recently as Fuzzy in Transparent. But I just, the cast in this, it's like they got, there you go. There's Richard Dreyfuss. I mean, sorry, Joe Polish, really looking like that could be the moment where he turns around and say, you don't understand about a great white. This is a predator that's going to, eat everything it sees. He could be saying that in that still. I really thought when I was watching it was Richard Dreyfuss, but I was very young at the time. Great film. There was a sequel planned. I think it was a 2-part miniseries. Somehow I got the scripts for those.
Don't know where you got them from.
I don't know, Inside Man. They just appeared one day in my inbox from a coded email that I could not decipher. I had a read through of those, and it's like set on a Russian base, and they're really actually pretty good. It's a shame we did not get to see those. Okay, right. I'm spending way too much time on this. We got to move quick now. So, right. So, I've already said my number 2 because I think I said it was The Fog. My number 3 was Misery. Which had been picked previously. So I think we might have skipped over that. My number 3 was Misery. I think I forgot to mention that. My number 2 was The Fog. So so sorry, I got those wrong slightly. So I think we're now on to our number 1, aren't we?
Yep.
Unless anybody in chat, by the way, if anybody else in chat wants to put in a number 2, and that sounds ruder than I intend, please
drop your number 2 in the chat.
Please drop your number 2 in the chat now. Yeah,
just plop it down there.
If you could, that could just go on for ages, couldn't it? So we're on to our number 1 picks. Now, I'm going to jump ahead of Wayne and just say now that my number 1 pick was The Thing. Awesome. So we've already done my number. So I think, by the way, with the scoring, I think it's probably impossible for anything to top The Thing. Do you see what I did there?
And I'm going to jump in and I'm going to say that was also my number 1. So we.
Okay. So
I think we know what movies won.
so I think The Thing is the number 1 horror film of this era, from what I can see, unless chat is going to really turn it around with their number 1 picks. Let's see. Okay, so we got 2 votes for The Thing. We've got a Creep Show in the chat there from David Macy. Interesting choice.
Yeah, good movie.
And is it Creep Show 1 or Creep Show 2 that's got the weird oil slick thing in the lake?
No, that was 2. That was
Easter.
2. Yeah.
I like that short. That was good fun. Especially the ending of that. So Wayne, what's your number 1?
My number 1 choice is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3.
Oh, thank God you didn't say part 2.
Dream Warriors.
Strangled you.
I think this is the best of everything to do with Elm Street. I mean, it's a world builder, it's a character builder, it's a mythology builder, it's creepy, it's everything that's great about the Elm Street franchise as a horror show, but it's also great as a vehicle for Freddy Krueger and Robert Englund by extension. I mean, it's a showcase for Robert Englund. This is, as I said earlier on, this is the one where he really brought personality to the character, but not to the point of the later films where he became kind of a comedic quipster, so he's still terrifying in this film. And I mean, it's also the best kills. If we're talking about a horror movie in those terms, it's the best kills. I mean, I will never forget the first time I saw the marionette sequence where the guy's being led out by Freddy by his tendons, and it's horrific, but it's also so memorable, and it's just great filmmaking. And Chuck Russell here was at top form. He's absolutely brilliant. And I mean, when it comes back to working on the book, I've never, in any book I've ever written, I've never kind of consulted with anybody, as to, is this any good? Is this whatever? But I really had a hard time. It was probably the hardest I've ever worked on a single chapter on any of my books, because I really wanted to get this right. Because I spoke to so many people on that movie, behind the scenes and whatever, including Chuck Russell. And I really didn't want, if you look at any of the documentaries or any of the histories about Nightmare on Elm Street 3, you'll hear about the kind of the fractured relationships that were going on between Chuck Russell and the cast or various crew members, because you had young kind of non-union indie guys working on this movie, but then you also had some, veteran filmmakers, who were unionized kind of guys. So there was a little bit of a rub between some of the factions there. But I didn't want that to be the kind of the backbone of my chapter, because I wanted to give everybody their kind of fair shake. I didn't want it to be a Chuck Russell punching bag either. So I consulted with a friend of the channel, David McGiffert, because I thought if one person has experience on movies and kind of the political nature of a set, David McGiffert does. And, I talked to him about it. I said, I really wanted this to be fair. Does it feel real? Does it feel like, that it's an honest representation of what could have went down on the set? And he said, yeah, you were totally fair. So, and then Roy Wagner, the cinematographer who I interviewed and spoke to a lot about it, he put a quote on the back of the book, actually, which said that this is the most authentic thing he's ever read in terms of a film book. So, when he said that, that meant a lot to me in terms of, wow, I really got this right, the tone of the piece right. So that film is very important to me. It was one of the first films I ever rented on VHS. It was the film that introduced me to Elm Street, Freddy Krueger, and the whole idea of horror cinema, I think. So it means so much to me on many levels, more than just being a horror movie or an Elm Street movie. It's part of me. It's one of those movies that, when we think about movies that we love, and there's certain movies that are kind of inseparable from our love of cinema or of the art form, and Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is that to me. It's the best of Elm Street, but to me it's also the best of 80s horror. It's the best of horror, I think, full stop. It's just a great piece of art, and it's a great piece of entertainment, and it'll never be topped in terms of franchise horror cinema, I think.
I always thought Craig Watson was a very underrated actor who was in Elm Street 3, and I'm pretty sure I saw this movie at the cinema in the States, because it's the one where you've got the kid with the wheelchair, and then he has to face the evil wheelchair, And then there's the girl that's a drug addict and the suckers come to life. Yeah, I saw that in the States, I remember.
Well, that's one of the things I really love about it as well, is the themes, the thematic depths that it goes through. It goes through each of these kids in the psychiatric ward that they're in, and Freddy plays to their to their issues, and each of those issues are very real world kind of things. As you say, there's the drug addict, there's the kid with aggression issues, there's the kid with the parental issues, and whatever else it is. And that's one of the great things about these films. And again, the reason why I wrote the book in the first place was to kind of dig into these very real world issues that the Elm Street movies do address. Now, it's the kind of thing that it's so well made and so entertaining that you could watch this movie and just enjoy it as a piece of entertainment. But if you want to, you can really dig into some very disturbing and real world issues in these films. And I think that's what makes that, it gives them that added depth that I think a lot of other horror movies of this period don't have, and especially of those, like I say, of those kind of franchise kind of movies. And I think of all those Elm Street movies, this is just the pinnacle. This is the absolute best of the best.
Fantastic. I wanted to give the late, great John Saxon a shout out. Very much a B-movie actor with an A-list performance in most of his work, I would argue, and probably an actor that should have been given some other roles to show, what he could do, because he was a really, really fine actor.
Yeah, he was a very fine actor. Yeah, you're right. Apparently, Tarantino was he was Tarantino's first choice for Max Cherry and Jackie Brown.
Interesting.
Wonder why he wasn't able to do it, or why he didn't do it. Perhaps.
Robert Forster apparently had kind of epitomized the character a little bit more. He was closer to the character, his whole demeanor, and But John Saxon was his first choice. And he was aiming on working with John Saxon again, or trying to work with John Saxon on another project, but sadly,
Gourd King, what's your number one pick?
My number one is The Shining.
Fantastic!
Yeah, The Shining. It's to this day, it's still it still scares me to this day watching it. It's just this excellent descent into this family's madness. It has, I think, the most effective horror movie score of all time. It's if you think about it, it's like really very little happens in the first hour of that movie, and the score is really driving the overall mood in so many ways. It has obviously incredible performances. Jack Nicholson first and foremost, Shelley Duvall, Scatman Crothers, Danny Lloyd. I mean, they all do a fantastic job, and it's just this incredible haunted house. I mean, it's a hotel, but it's this haunted house story with just slowly descends into something really terrible, and then ultimately into violence near the end. And there's, like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of interesting conspiracy theories that have been concocted from it. And I mean, I actually really love the Room 237 documentary. I don't know how much of it I would actually agree with, but
I think zero would be.
Just about none of it. But
but it's kind of a quaint documentary, isn't it?
It's like, still a really fun one to watch. It's a great fan theory documentary.
And people think what they think, and that's really that. But you're right. This is it's a fantastically well shot, well crafted movie, and I actually think, and a lot of people will completely disagree with me on this one, but I think this is another one of those movies that is far better than the book itself. I wasn't particularly enamored with the book. I thought there was a lot in the book. I think the accident with the motorcyclist and everything that I just kind of was a bit sort of erroneous for me. And I think what Kubrick did was pared this down to the absolute essence of it. I've no idea why Stephen King would have been so vitriolic about the adaptation.
Was he not happy with it then?
No, he didn't like it at all.
He hated it. No, he
really
didn't speak to Kubrick. Yeah, he didn't speak to Kubrick afterwards. Yeah.
I mean, I think the scenes in the gardens with the snow are just like cinema genius. I
Yeah.
don't approve of what Kubrick did to what he put Shelley Duvall through, which is pretty well known.
Right.
The other thing I have to say I really like about this movie, and I in some ways I kind of left it off my list. I forgot to mention it. Is the sequel that came out to this,
Dr. Sleep.
Doctor
Dr.
Sleep,
Sleep.
right?
Yeah, really good sequel.
I mean, I was watching it, and I was like, I didn't know anything about it, and I went to see it at the cinema actually, and I'm sort of watching it, and I'm going like, then they're sort of driving up to this big house. I'm like, oh, they're ripping off The Shining here. That's interesting because the first half of the movie you'd never know that.
I mean, the only reason I knew it is because I knew beforehand going in that okay, this is the sequel to The Shining, and then Ewan McGregor's playing Danny basically. But,
I didn't know anything. I love going to see movies where you don't know anything, which is so hard these days. And then then sort of the whole thing with bringing up all the ghosts to fight this new evil force. Brilliant idea. It was great.
Yeah. Dr. Sleep is really, really. I mean, I thought when it was getting ready to come out, I was like, they're making a sequel to an old classic. That'll be probably crap. And then they come up with it. It's like, oh my gosh, this is actually pretty excellent. I really like this movie a lot. The Shining is it's incredible. Just an incredible movie. One of my absolute favorites.
Yeah. I mean, the sequence where we're following Danny through the corridor on his little tricycle.
Oh gosh!
It's amazing,
terrifying.
And you watch, but the fact that he is so perfectly in frame, in center frame, all the way through, just amazing work. The sets, I mean, those sets are just masterful.
Great bit of trivia here. Scatman Crothers, who gets his head chopped off in it, was the voice of Hong Kong Phooey.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
#1 super guy. Yeah. I love that show with Spot the cat. And
the good thing about Hong Kong Phooey was he was also quicker than the human eye.
He was, which is a good caption for this poster. Retro Nerd Girl said King didn't like the change of the film highlighting the cold when the book highlighted the heat. That's interesting because that's a film when you watch it, you feel like putting a jacket on, even if you're sitting out in the garden in a deck chair. It is. There's been a few films like that I've watched and I've actually felt cold.
Well, The Thing was another example of that.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely does do that. So okay, maybe I get that if the tone was kind of reversed for him, he probably was a bit upset. Well, guys, I have the final votes in. If anybody else in chat hasn't put their #1 in, put it in now because it might change things. Because the votes between 4 and 5 are a little bit close. Also, there's one in the top 5 currently that I don't think any of us even voted for at all, but different people in the chat voted for it at different times, and it's accumulated points. See, Retro should have been on this stream because she's saying there's other themes she didn't agree with, but she has just done a 4-hour stream, as she told me. So I did 2 streams in a row once. That was not a good idea. My voice was dead, so I understand. Well, guys, The Thing is #1.
Yeah.
As we determine. Anyone else in chat, if you haven't put your vote in, I'll just give you a brief moment to do that now. Wayne, have you got anything you want to say about The Shining?
No, I totally agree with what everybody said. But as I say, I do love that documentary. I do love all the fan theories because I think there's some really, really interesting ideas in there. And I mean, it's like it's a rabbit hole. I mean, the more you go looking into these things, you kind of go, God, yes, there is something there to that theory. But I think that's one of the great things about it. It's a film that just keeps on giving. If you want to look into it, if you want to look deep into all these themes and ideas, it's there. Or if you just want to take it at face value as just this really solid thriller about a man who goes mad, he's an alcoholic and who has obviously anger issues and just suggestions of abuse going on there in the family. You can just take it as that, and it works exquisitely. But I think as a Kubrick film as well, it's also one of my favorite. I just seen it there. What's the most outrageous theory you've heard? Oh Jesus, there's many. There's many. I don't know.
Anyone?
Nothing.
I would say
nothing-
probably
the Minotaur theory.
Yeah, that's the one. And then I've
That's a
heard
bit of a weird one. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a guy that's on a ski holiday poster, and somebody has some theory that this it's actually a Minotaur, and it's all to do with the maze, and you know.
Yeah, some of them are extremely far-reaching and just mad. But,
Okay.
That's
out there.
yeah, definitely.
I think the most out there one I heard was that Kubrick was trying to hint that he filmed the quote-unquote fake moon landing.
Yeah, I mean, with his hints in Danny's jumper and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
I don't know.
I've heard that. I've heard that one.
Again, if you want to go digging into it, I'm sure you'll find some stuff that'll support it. But
if you want to know the
I
truth,
think you can kind of find support anything really, can't you?
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Right, guys, we're going to do this is the final 5 with the points. So Wayne, you might have to hit your mute.
Okay.
So yeah. So chat. I'm afraid I gave you a chance if anybody else hadn't voted, but I think with the key people that are still here already did so. Thank you very much, by the way, chat, and the people that are watching for taking part. Really appreciate you sticking around for the whole stream. Really enjoyed doing these, especially with my guests who, before we wrap things up, want to thank each of them for coming in. Wayne, of course, the man of many books. Now, don't forget to get your copy. It's available on Amazon now. And the actual quote is, "Wow, this is one of the best pieces of writing on filmmaking that I've ever read. Wayne really got the essence of being on the set during that time. I'm astonished at his accuracy. It was a very complicated shoot with a great deal of emotion. Wayne presents an honest representation of what occurred. Very impressive." And that was from Roy Wagner, who was the cinematographer for Elm Street 3.
As you can imagine, that meant a hell of a lot to hear that from.
Sure, yeah. I'll give you a quote for your next book. Okay, so these are the final scores, people, with all points tallied up. At number 1, we have The Thing. At number 2, we have American Werewolf in London, only a couple of points behind The Thing. Elm Street 3 at number 3. The Lost Boys at number 4. And The Shining at number 5. So that includes the points from people in the chat. And it just goes to show how wide people's tastes were, because there was a lot of films both in chat and with our own lists that only got mentioned once. And I'll just throw out a few of them. Hellraiser, Evil Dead 2, Zombie Flesh Eaters, Lady in White, The Hitcher, The Omen, Lair of the White Worm, Predator, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I'm not that surprised that only got mentioned once. Begging for a remake, of course. And then, one other person mentioned The Hitcher. Poltergeist only got mentioned one time. Fright Night only got mentioned one time. Near Dark only one time. The Fog only one time. So the Wicker Man only once. Nobody in... I think only one person put The Exorcist as well. Got a high score, but just the one time. So there was quite a lot of films that just got mentioned the once, but definitely a commonality with the movie The Thing. I do think it is the ultimate horror film. Great performances, great story, good blend of sci-fi, but the sci-fi in it is very minimal. And it feels like a very grounded film. Poltergeist was on my short list of 20, and it hovered around the number 9 spot for quite a while, David. Great film. I still love watching it now. Brilliant. So look, thanks everyone. We've been on quite a long time. In fact, we're coming up for 3 hours now, 2 hours, 44 minutes. It is just gone midnight in the UK. So I think we're going to wrap things up. Gourd King, thank you so much for coming on. What you got coming up, sir?
Thanks for having me. I do video game streams Monday through Wednesday typically, and the occasional Thursday, which includes tomorrow. You can catch me a lot of times live with various people. I've been here now a few times. This was the first time scheduled. I'll be on Cannoli Sasquatch's stream Monday to talk Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be on that one myself because I was on the first part, wasn't I? So.
Yep. And then I have a couple of videos in production right now. A show review for Rings of Power Episode 1 and a movie review that I'll be doing after that. So.
Fantastic. Inside Man, I think you're going to be back with me next Tuesday where we're just doing a general discussion and we're doing a new series about our favorite directors. Yeah. And we're going to be doing the first one of those is going to be the films of Michael Mann.
Yeah. I think before that, I'm actually running away this weekend to join the circus. So I'll be back though.
Fantastic. That sounds like that's another inside story you'll be able to tell us about on a film set in the near future. So fantastic for that. We definitely are going to do a top 5 sci-fi in the same era from 70 to 1990. Lots of great films in there. Wayne, would you be up for taking part in that one?
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Good stuff. So before we have any more echoing too severely, Wayne, just tell us what other books you've got coming out or what other books you've got out for our viewers.
Sure thing. My next book, which is coming out in a few months' time, is called Hired Guns, Portraits of Women in Alternative Music. So I co-wrote that with my best friend, Amanda Kramer, who is the keyboardist for the Psychedelic Furs. So it's really kind of about her world, which is kind of like...
Psychedelic Furs!
Yeah, she's
pretty in pink.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Amanda's worked with some great people, but yeah, we worked, it's in her world. So we're talking about like 10 female musicians who they're quite well known. They'd be kind of eminent in their fields. They work with major artists. So just kind of charting their careers as session and touring musicians. So that's my next book coming out. I'm also doing another book with Amanda, which is kind of tracing the development of film soundtracks from the 60s to the 90s. So kind of how soundtracks changed across those 3 decades. I have a book documenting the career of the cinematographer Roy Wagner, who we just mentioned. And I'm also working on a book on the Halloween franchise, which I also mentioned. So very busy at the moment, working on 3 books and anticipating the release of another. So keep going.
Fab stuff. There's some of Wayne's books there, including the biography of Nick McLean, who's a director of photography, who we still hope to get on the stream. And in fact, I'm going to call him right now because I need to have a chat with him about Tim Thomason. So, and David McGiffert has promised to go around to Nick McLean's house and sort his camera out. So if we can get that sorted. Melvin's already getting ahead of the game. Number 1, Star Wars. Number 2, Empire Strikes Back. 3, Alien. 4, Aliens. 5, Blade Runner. Mate, that's actually a pretty good list. I think my 5 might not be too far off of that.
But are we going to be talking about hard sci-fi or sci-fi fantasy?
Sci-fi, whatever. Hard sci-fi, soft sci-fi, comedy sci-fi. If your number 1 film is Ice Pirates, which may well be Retro Nerd Girl's vote, me and her both love that film actually, then it can be Ice Pirates. But if your number 1 film is 2001, it can be 2001. It's sci-fi across the board. So it's but that was
1968. So we're kind of outside that 1970.
You can have 2010, the year we made contact.
Nah.
It's not a bad film actually. It's underrated, that movie. Well, I mean, I know Inside Man that you're already writing down Space Hunter Adventures in the Forbidden Zone for your number 2 choice on that list.
How did you know?
Exactly. It's going to be fun. I can tell already.
You know me too well.
I do. And Gourd King is already torn between Killer Clowns and Outer Space because that technically is a sci-fi also.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
It is. All right, guys. Look, thanks everybody in chat. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry, I've just got a Retro saying she does love it, but it's not her favorite. Retro, you're a big sci-fi nerd. You have got to take part in our top 5 sci-fi 1970 to 1990. So we'll try and stream that at a time that works for you. I'll have a chat with you because it would be great to get her on that because it's right up her street. She's a big Flash Gordon fan. I mean, there's Terminator. See, the Terminator's another one, and that could have been a horror film. We could have had that on a list tonight, and I would have accepted that actually. So it's interesting that nobody went there. But anyway, we'll talk about it all another time. Listen, brilliant having everybody on. Thank you so much for coming on, everyone. And everyone in chat. See you all again real soon. And don't forget to pick up the phone and tell someone that you haven't spoken to for a while that you care about them and see how they're doing. Because, people like that after COVID. We'll see you all again real soon. Take care. Bye.
See y'all.
Bye-bye.